I never thought much about camping alone. I'm the type who craves solitude now and then, the kind of person who finds peace in leaving the world behind for a while. When life back home becomes overwhelming, a trip into the wilderness always seems like the perfect escape. No phone calls, no emails, just nature and quiet. So when the stress of my life got to be too much, I decided to rent an RV and head into the heart of Texas hill country. The reviews for the campground I found were glowing, peaceful, remote, with a handful of other campers scattered across acres of forest. It sounded perfect, exactly what I needed to clear my mind. I arrived just before sunset, the orange glow of the dying sun casting long shadows across the narrow, winding dirt road leading to the campsite. The place was more isolated than I had expected. Maybe 3 or 4 other RVs scattered around the grounds, some tucked away in the trees. I parked my RV near the edge of the woods, feeling comforted by the distance from the others. I liked it that way, the quiet, the space. The campsite was alive with the sounds of evening. The chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I sat outside, making a simple dinner: grilled chicken, some canned beans, and a cold beer. The sky above was clear, the stars starting to prick the velvet black of the night. I locked the RV doors before heading inside around 11:30 p.m. There was something about the stillness of the night that felt oddly comforting, like the world had paused for a moment just for me. I crawled into bed, the warmth of the blanket surrounding me, and drifted into a deep sleep. But then came the noise. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft click, like something shifting in the dark. I stirred, blinking into the darkness of the RV. For a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing, maybe just a branch scraping against the metal. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. The unmistakable sound of the latch on the RV door being disturbed. My heart immediately started to race. I had locked the door, or at least I thought I had. The uncertainty gripped me. Could I have missed it? Did I lock it properly? But hearing that sound again, the click of the latch, made the air in my lungs tighten. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was trying to get inside. I lay there motionless, trying to steady my breathing, but every instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly wrong. Was it an animal? Maybe a raccoon or a deer? But no, that sound was too delicate, too precise. The door. Someone was tampering with the door. My mind was spinning, each second stretching out like hours. The only thing within reach was a small flashlight sitting on the counter next to the kitchen. Not much of a weapon, but it was all I had. I didn't want to move, but I knew I had to. If someone was outside, I needed to know who they were. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the nagging fear that making a sound, anything, would make things worse. I lay still, barely breathing, as the sound of the latch clicking grew louder. Closer. I could feel the darkness pressing in, thick and heavy, like it was alive, watching me. My body was frozen, but my mind was running a mile a minute. What if it was another camper? Why wouldn't they knock? Why would they open the door so quietly? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. My hands were trembling as I reached for the flashlight. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat like a drum of panic. I grabbed it, turned it on, and made my way toward the door. Every creak of the RV floorboard seemed to echo through the small space, louder than the last. My breath was shallow, caught in my throat. I was trying to keep quiet, trying to stay as still as possible, but I felt like every movement could betray me. When I reached the door, I paused. My heart slammed against my chest, my thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. I had to look, but part of me didn't want to. What if the man was right there, staring in through the window? What if he was already inside? I took a deep breath, then glanced through the small frosted window next to the door. The moonlight was dim, barely enough to make out anything. But there, in the shadowed distance, I saw a figure. It was standing too still, like a statue. And the feeling of dread that washed over me was immediate and overwhelming. My heart thudded in my chest as I realized the door was slightly open, just enough for a person to squeeze through. My blood ran cold. Could it be another camper? Someone who'd gotten lost or drunk and decided to stumble onto my RV? But why hadn't they knocked? Why had they opened the door so quietly? And why did it feel like I wasn't supposed to see them? Then, without warning, the figure moved. I froze. There, standing halfway inside the RV, was a man. His face was so close to the window that it seemed to press against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight at me. The coldness of his gaze chilled me to the bone. It was like he had been waiting for me to notice him, to look into those eyes. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to scream, to fight back, but my body didn't move. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. He didn't say a word. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there, watching me. His ragged jacket swayed slightly in the breeze. His hair was matted, dirty, and his face was gaunt, hollowed by something darker than fatigue. There was something wrong about him. Something that wasn't just unsettling. It was dangerous. His eyes weren't wild or panicked. No, they were far too calm. It was the calmness of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who was hunting. I didn't know who this man was, but every fiber of my being screamed that he wasn't here to talk. He wasn't here for a friendly chat. I had to act. I grabbed the flashlight, flicking it on and shining it directly into his face. The light illuminated his features in stark detail. His eyes reflected something more than madness, something colder, like a predator staring down its prey. The light caught the sweat beading on his forehead, his uneven breath coming in ragged gasps. There was a flicker of recognition, but it didn't make sense. Had I seen this man before? Was he someone from the news? I could barely think straight. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I could feel the blood rush to my face. "Who are you?" The words came out of my mouth in a hoarse whisper. I didn't know why I even asked. What good would it do? He didn't seem interested in answering. He didn't respond. Instead, his hand reached toward the door, slowly pushing it open wider. It creaked, like a warning, like an invitation. My mind raced. What the hell was I supposed to do? I couldn't stay here. I couldn't run either, not with him blocking the doorway. But I couldn't wait for him to come inside. Then, just as panic started to take over, I heard it, a rustling, something in the trees, a truck engine, a distant hum, growing louder. Closer. I wasn't alone. With pure instinct, I rushed to the driver's seat. My hands trembled as I grabbed the keys from the dashboard. With a desperate jerk, I shoved them into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life. The man outside flinched violently, jerking back as if the sound had physically struck him. And then, I was gone. I saw him drop low, crouching down just outside the RV's threshold, trying to shield himself from the sudden noise. His hands shot up in a defensive reflex, but as he did, something small, maybe a rock or some tool, clattered to the ground, the sharp sound echoing in the still night. The noise was enough to shake him, but it also bought me a precious second. Before he could react further, I slammed the RV into drive and floored the gas. The tires screeched on the dirt road, and the RV lurched forward, throwing me back into the seat. I didn't look back as the campground disappeared behind me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't know who that man was or how he had gotten so close without me hearing a single sound, but one thing was certain: he wasn't just lost in the woods. He was hunting. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. My name is Lawrence Mosby. I was 33 years old when this happened. I've been living in my RV for 3 years now, moving from place to place, always searching for the next quiet spot. I tell myself it's for the photography, the landscapes, the wildlife, but deep down, I know the truth. I don't want to be around people. Green Swamp was just another stop, a place to set up for a few days, get some good shots, and move on before anyone noticed I was there. The land stretched for miles, thick with palmetto and cypress trees, the kind of wilderness that swallowed people whole. I liked that. I shouldn't have gone so deep. I parked off a narrow dirt road, past the designated campsites. It was illegal, but no one was going to find me out there. The first day was uneventful. Just me, my camera, and the slow creep of the Florida heat. I hiked a bit, set up my gear near a clearing where I'd spotted a barred owl, and returned to the RV before sundown. Then the noises started. At first, I thought it was an animal, a rustling in the palmettos, a soft shifting sound, like something moving just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, expecting to catch a raccoon or a stray hog. There was nothing there. The trees stood still. The wind didn't move, but the feeling in the air, it was heavy, charged, like something was watching. I locked up and tried to sleep, but the feeling stayed. The next morning, I checked my camera trap. It was gone. I'd left it mounted to a tree just 20 feet from the RV, aimed at the clearing, but the strap had been cut, clean through. Not torn, not broken, cut. I swallowed my unease and chalked it up to poachers. I'd seen plenty of them in places like this, setting illegal traps or hunting without a license. Maybe one of them didn't want me filming. Then I found the footprints. They were barefoot, large, deep, leading into the palmetto. I turned back to the RV and spent the rest of the day inside, revolver within reach. That night, something woke me up. A single, deliberate tap on the window. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Tap, tap. I reached for my flashlight, my fingers trembling, and flicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the window. There was nothing there. The palmetto rustled, though there was no wind. I stayed up until dawn. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I packed up, tossed my gear in the RV, and turned the key. The engine didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. I checked under the hood. Everything looked fine, but the battery was completely drained. Impossible. I'd just driven here 2 days ago, and everything had been working fine. I took out my solar charger and hooked up my phone. It was dead too. I swore under my breath. I needed to hike back to the main road and flag someone down. I grabbed my revolver, my backpack, and a canteen and started walking. The forest felt different, smaller somehow. The trees leaned closer, their branches arching overhead like ribs in a carcass. The palmetto whispered as I passed. An hour in, I saw something up ahead. A figure, standing between the trees. My breath caught in my throat. It was tall, impossibly thin. Its arms hung too long at its sides. The sun was behind it, casting it in silhouette, but something was wrong with its face. There was nothing there. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, empty skin. I blinked, and it was closer. I didn't think. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't stop until I saw the RV again. I locked the doors, drew the blinds, and sat with my back against the wall, my revolver clutched tight. I wasn't alone out here. The sun dipped low. The trees stretched long shadows across the ground. Then the radio turned on. At first just static, but underneath, something else. A voice. Faint, garbled. I turned the dial, trying to tune it in. It was my own voice. I froze. The radio crackled and I heard myself speaking. It's here, I see it. Then, another voice. Low, whispering, right against my ear. Don't look at me. I threw the radio against the floor. The static didn't stop. Something slammed into the RV. The walls shook. The windows rattled. I gripped the revolver, sweat dripping down my back. Another hit, harder this time. A shadow passed over the window. I clamped my eyes shut. Don't look at it. Don't look. A whisper curled through the air, pressing against my skin. Trade places. The air turned heavy, thick like water. My chest felt like it was caving in. Something brushed against the door. The handle rattled. I swallowed a scream. Then, silence. I sat there for hours, unmoving. The whispering never came back. When dawn finally broke, I threw the door open and ran. I ran through the swamp, my legs burning, my lungs raw. I ran until I stumbled onto a dirt road and collapsed. A hunter found me hours later, dehydrated, delirious. He radioed for help. When I told him where I had been, his face paled. You were in his part of the woods. I didn't ask who he was. A week later, I went back for my RV. The engine started on the first try. The battery was fine. My phone turned on, fully charged. I checked my camera. Most of the photos were normal. Trees, the clearing, the swamp. Then, the last one. It was me, sleeping in the RV, taken from outside the window. I left Florida that night, but sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear the whisper. Don't look at me. My name is Jason Shaw. And this happened to me on August 14th, 1987. I was a long-haul truck driver hauling freight across the country. I drove a beat-up Kenworth W900, and my route took me through some of the most desolate parts of the United States. This time, I was headed from Memphis to Albuquerque, a long, lonely stretch of road that I'd driven more times than I cared to count. I'd been on the road for about 10 hours and was making good time. The CB radio crackled occasionally with the usual chatter from other truckers, but mostly it was just me and the hum of the engine. I had planned to stop for the night in a small town called Tucumcari, New Mexico. I liked the place. It had a decent truck stop, and the folks there were friendly enough. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the flat, arid landscape. I had just passed through Amarillo and was pushing on when my truck started acting up. It began with a slight shudder, then a loud bang, and before I knew it, I was coasting to the side of the highway. I got out, cursing my luck, and popped the hood. The engine was steaming, and it didn't take long to figure out that my radiator hose had blown. I was stranded. I grabbed my toolbox and flashlight, but I knew it was a lost cause. I didn't have a spare hose, and the nearest town was miles away. I got back in the cab and picked up the CB mic, hoping to catch a friendly voice. Breaker 19, this is Roadrunner. Any of you good buddies got your ears on? I'm broke down just west of Amarillo. Over. I waited, but there was nothing but static. I tried again. Still nothing. I sighed and leaned back in my seat. It looked like I was spending the night right there. I made myself as comfortable as I could and closed my eyes, hoping to get some rest before dealing with my situation in the morning. I don't know how long I had been asleep when I heard the knock. It was a light tapping on my window. Groggy, I sat up and looked out, expecting to see another trucker, or maybe a good Samaritan. Instead, I saw a man standing there, silhouetted by the moonlight. He was tall and thin, wearing a dirty baseball cap and a tattered jacket. I rolled down the window just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Need some help?" the man replied, his voice raspy. "Yeah, my truck's busted. You got a phone or anything?" The man shook his head. "No phone, but there's a gas station a few miles back. I can give you a ride if you want." Something about him made me uneasy, but I didn't have many options. "All right," I said reluctantly. "Just let me grab my stuff." I climbed out of the truck, grabbing my flashlight and toolbox. The man watched me with an unsettling intensity. We walked over to his car, an old, beat-up sedan that looked like it had seen better days. I got in the passenger seat, and he started the engine. The interior was filthy, and the air reeked of stale cigarette smoke. We drove in silence for a while, the darkness of the desert enveloping us. I kept my hand on my flashlight, ready to use it if things went south. After about 10 minutes, I realized we weren't heading back toward Amarillo. The gas station should have been in the other direction. "Hey," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I think you're going the wrong way. The gas station's back that way." The man didn't respond. He just kept driving, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong. "Listen, man, I appreciate the help, but I think I'll just walk back," I said, reaching for the door handle. Before I could pull it, the man locked the doors with a click that echoed through the car. "Stay put," he muttered. "We're almost there." "Almost where?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice from shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned off the highway onto a dirt road. The car bumped and jostled as we drove further into the middle of nowhere. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. I could try to overpower him, but he was bigger and probably stronger. I could wait for an opportunity to escape, but who knew when that would come? Finally, the car came to a stop in front of a dilapidated cabin. The windows were boarded up, and the place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The man got out and walked around to my side, opening the door. "Out," he said, his voice cold. I hesitated, then stepped out of the car, keeping my flashlight close. "What is this place?" I asked, trying to stall for time. "Shut up and move," he growled, shoving me toward the cabin. Inside, the place was even worse. The floor was covered in dust and debris, and the air was thick with the smell of rot. The man pushed me into a corner and tied my hands behind my back with a piece of rope he pulled from his jacket. My mind was racing, trying to figure out a way out of this. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to a table and picked up a rusty knife. My blood ran cold as he approached me, the blade glinting in the dim light. I knew I had to do something, and fast. "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I've got money. I can give you whatever you want." The man smirked, the first sign of any emotion I'd seen from him. "It's not about money," he said quietly. "It's about making you suffer." Before I could react, he lunged at me, the knife slashing through the air. I managed to twist to the side, the blade cutting into my arm instead of my chest. Pain shot through me, but I didn't have time to think about it. I kicked out with my legs, knocking the man off balance. He stumbled back, giving me a moment to act. I struggled to my feet, my hands still bound behind me. I ran for the door, but he was on me in an instant, tackling me to the ground. We grappled, the knife inches from my face. I could feel his hot breath on my skin, the smell of sweat and tobacco overwhelming. With a burst of adrenaline, I managed to roll us over, pinning him beneath me. I brought my head down hard, smashing it into his nose. He grunted in pain, and I felt his grip on the knife loosen. I wrenched it from his hand and plunged it into his chest. He let out a strangled cry, then went limp. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Blood was everywhere, and the reality of what I had just done hit me like a freight train. I had to get out of there. I ran out of the cabin, my hands still bound, and made my way back to the car. I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to unlock the doors. I drove as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I made it to a gas station just outside of Amarillo, my arm throbbing from the wound. I stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor. The attendant called the police, and within minutes, I was surrounded by flashing lights and sirens. They cut the rope from my wrists and bandaged my arm before taking my statement. The man I killed was identified as Daniel Parker, a drifter with a long history of violence. He had been linked to several disappearances in the area, and it was clear that I was supposed to be his next victim. The police found the cabin, and inside, they discovered evidence of his other crimes: clothes, personal items, and even a few bones. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the experience haunted me. I left trucking a few months later, unable to shake the memories of that night. I moved to a small town in Oregon, far from the highways and the nightmares that plagued me. I never forgot Daniel Parker or the fear I felt in that cabin. Life goes on, they say, but some scars never fully heal. I'm grateful to be alive, but every now and then, I wake up in a cold sweat. The memory of his cold eyes staring into mine. It's a part of me now, a dark chapter in my life that I can't erase. My name is Jeffrey Walker, and in 1997, on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, I spent an entire afternoon trying to patch a busted water pump behind my uncle's old house, thinking I should probably learn a decent trade before my back got any worse, and my sense of humor turned stale like last week's fry bread. I remember the morning heat hanging over the empty fields, the kind of heat that settles into your bones and makes every chore feel heavier. I tried tightening a bolt until my knuckles throbbed, then stepped back to look across the land. A few cottonwood trees framed the horizon, and beyond them, low hills rolled into dry grasslands dotted with scraggly shrubs. From where I stood, everything seemed quiet, just the distant rattle of a pickup on a dirt road and a breeze stirring dust along the fence lines. I stretched my stiff shoulders, thinking how I wasn't getting any younger. I had no proper education, no significant savings, and a knack for fixing nothing but leaky faucets and rusted hinges. Still, I figured life would roll on as it always had, slow, steady, uneventful. Around midday, I decided to walk out to check on some horses my cousin Owen kept near the far edge of the property. Owen trusted me to look after them whenever he got tied up elsewhere. I wanted to make sure one that had recently cut its leg wasn't getting infected. I didn't own a gun, Most folks around here did. But I always ended up spending my money on practical things like tools and cheap jokes. I used to say I was about as prepared for trouble as a cactus is for a flood. It was one of those lines nobody found funny except me. As I headed across the flat stretch, I noticed a strange hush. No birdsong, no distant barking of dogs. My steps scraped on loose gravel, and I coughed a little from the dust. The horses usually wandered near a shallow watering hole, just a puddle this time of year. I reached the spot to find the horses milling nervously, eyes wide as if something had spooked them. One mare snorted, ears twitching, and the others bunched up as if trying to present a united front against an unseen threat. I took a step closer, scanning the ground. Tracks, fresh and odd, cut through the dirt near the edge of the puddle. They were elongated, claw-tipped, like those of some overgrown bobcat that had decided it wanted a pair of boots to go with its dinner. I knelt down, ran my fingertips lightly along the marks. The horses shifted behind me, restless. I stood, feeling uneasy. Perhaps a predator had wandered in looking for a meal. Coyotes and mountain lions sometimes ventured near, but these prints looked wrong. The spacing, the depth, too heavy, too deliberate. I cracked a weak joke to myself, something about how I'd discovered the world's first gym-going bobcat that skipped leg day. It made me smile nervously. Then I heard a scream. I sprinted back toward the house, heart pounding. The scream had come from the direction of my uncle's place. As I rounded the corner near the old picket fence, I saw my friend Quentin stumbling out of the workshop behind the house, clutching his forearm. Blood dripped between his fingers. He didn't cry out again, but the horror in his face said it all. I rushed over, snatching a rag from my pocket to press on the wound. "What happened?" I asked, voice low. He just shook his head, eyes darting back toward the workshop's open door. Inside that workshop, where I'd stacked planks of lumber and hung old tools, I caught a glimpse of something moving behind a half-finished shelf. It hissed, low and sharp. No words, just a sound that meant business. I eased forward, adrenaline pumping, afraid but curious. In that dim light, I saw it, tall as a large dog but built more like a lean lynx, muscles strung tight under mangy black fur. Its head was elongated, ears tufted, and its teeth, too many, too long, curved inward like hooks. Its eyes were dark, reflecting the dull light. It reminded me of a wolverine that had decided to bulk up and take sides. Its tail flicked, once, twice, then it charged. I slammed the door and leaned against it, yelling for Quentin to run. My cousin Owen sprinted toward us from behind the main house, rifle cradled in his arms. He must have heard Quentin scream and come running. "Open it," Owen said, voice tight. "We can't let it roam free." I hesitated. Quentin groaned, pressing his wounded arm. The thing inside scratched at the wood, testing for weakness. I swallowed hard and stepped aside. Owen kicked the door open and fired a shot. Wood chips flew. The creature darted between shelves. Another shot rang out. Missed. The beast lunged forward, batting at Owen's rifle and sending it clattering to the floor. I yelled something incoherent and threw the rag I'd used on Quentin's arm, as if that would help. It didn't. The creature pounced, knocking Owen against the wall. The smell of sweat and blood hung heavy in the enclosed space. Quentin yelled, "We have to get it out of there." I felt useless, standing empty-handed, heart pounding like a drum. I snatched a broken hoe handle leaning near the door and jabbed it forward. The creature spun, jaws snapping, and tore into Quentin, who had tried to crawl toward Owen's rifle. Quentin cried out once, then fell still, his eyes open and glazed. I backed away, furious and terrified. Owen, dazed but alive, scrambled toward the rifle again. The creature lowered itself, ready to spring. Owen managed to get his hand on the gun's stock. Before he could raise it, the creature hurled forward, claws ripping through the fabric of Owen's jacket and into his chest. Owen gasped, and the rifle fired once, shooting into the ceiling. Dust and debris rained down. The creature bit deep, shaking its head. I shouted, "Hey!" as if my voice could matter. I lurched forward with the hoe handle, aiming for its neck. The blow landed, not hard enough. The creature turned its head, teeth glistening with blood. I felt my stomach tighten. I tried humor again, a desperate reaction. So much for a peaceful afternoon. It didn't laugh. It rushed me. I tripped backward, elbow striking the floor, pain shooting up my arm. I rolled, scrambling to the door, heart hammering. I needed a weapon better than a stick. Outside, the dust had settled under a dull sky. I rushed to my uncle's truck, the old Chevy parked under a lean-to. The keys dangled in the ignition. Owen often kept a hunting knife in the glove box. I yanked it open, empty. Except for a single candy bar and an old photograph of him and Quentin, laughing over a broken engine block. I cursed under my breath, slammed the door, and scanned the yard. My uncle's tools were scattered: a shovel, a hammer, a crowbar. Nothing that guaranteed victory. Then I heard scratching at the doorway. The creature slipped out, low to the ground, body tense with grim purpose. Across the yard, I saw my neighbor Wapasha creeping forward with his hunting rifle, face grim. I gestured wildly, pointing at the beast. He took aim, fired once, missed. The creature bolted toward him. Wapasha fired again, winged it in the side. It howled, high and sharp, but kept coming. Wapasha tried to bolt, too late. The beast leapt onto him, clawing at his throat. He dropped like a sack of grain, rifle skittering away. I ran for the rifle, heart in my throat. As I reached it, the creature turned to me, blood darkening its fur. We locked eyes, and I muttered a line so absurd I can't believe I said it. You know, I'm not exactly a five-star meal, more of a drive-through snack. It crouched, tense. I raised the rifle, hands shaking. The beast moved first. I squeezed the trigger. The shot thundered, and the creature fell. Bruised but breathing, we survived. Bruised but breathing. At the end of that day, I stood outside again, rifle cradled in my arms. Dust settled over the land, and I took a long breath. I had no wisecrack, no joke. I only knew that I'd remember. Remember that one desperate day, that single terrible struggle with a predator no one had ever named. We had faced it, ended it, and proven ourselves capable of holding our ground. There was no mystery left to ponder, only a lesson. Sometimes the world holds creatures beyond our understanding. And whether they come from hungry desperation or twisted origins, we must meet them with all the courage we can gather. I never thought something like this would happen to me. I'm the type of person who always takes precautions, trusts my gut, and stays aware of my surroundings. But no amount of preparation could have prepared me for what happened that night in Lake Arrowhead, California. I had been living in my RV for about a year at the time. I wasn't doing anything extravagant, just working remotely, traveling around the West Coast, and enjoying the freedom that comes with living on the road. I had stayed in a lot of campgrounds, some more populated and some isolated. I love the peace of being out in nature, especially when I can park away from other campers. This particular night, I parked in a quieter spot near the woods, away from the main road. It was late October, so most of the summer tourists had already left, and the campground was almost empty. There were a couple of RVs a little further down, but nothing too close. I had the whole night to myself, and that's exactly how I liked it. Around 9 p.m., I made dinner, sat down to watch a show on my laptop, and settled in. The windows were closed, and the inside of the RV was warm, the small lamp on the table casting a soft glow over everything. Everything felt calm and safe. But then, around 11 p.m., I heard the knock. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. It was soft, almost tentative, like someone didn't want to disturb the peace too much. But then it came again. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't seen a soul for hours. And this late at night. Who would be knocking on my door in the middle of nowhere? I cautiously got up and went to the small peephole in the door, but it was too dark outside to see anything. I could make out shapes moving outside, but nothing specific. I felt that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the kind you get when something isn't right. But I tried to shake it off. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking a little. A man's voice responded almost immediately. "Hey, sorry to bother you. My car broke down just up the road. Can I use your phone to call for help?" I was confused. There were a few other RVs around, and if his car had really broken down, why hadn't he gone to one of them? It didn't make sense. Where's your car? I asked, trying to sound calm. "Just a little ways up the road," he answered. "I didn't see anyone else around, and I was hoping I could just use your phone." I didn't buy it. I knew there were at least 2 other RVs not far from me, and there were other campers on the main road. Why come all the way to me, especially at this hour? The more I thought about it, the more something felt wrong. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You should try the other RVs. They might be awake." There was a long pause. Too long. I could hear the man shifting outside, his footsteps moving back and forth. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. "Are you sure? I really don't want to be out here much longer. It's freezing, and I could really use a hand." A sudden urge hit me to lock the door, to grab something to defend myself, but I didn't want to overreact. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry. I'm just trying to relax tonight. Please leave." I thought that would be the end of it, but then the situation turned worse, much worse. I heard him step closer to the door, his voice now lower and more insistent. "You're not being very friendly. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." My heart slammed in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to do something, anything. I stepped back from the door, keeping my eyes on the handle. I could see the shadow of him through the small window, pacing back and forth. "Listen," I said, trying to sound tougher than I felt. "I've already told you I can't help. Please just go." And then the door handle started rattling. My blood ran cold. He was trying to open it. My RV is old, but I made sure to lock it when I got inside, especially at night. But hearing the handle turn, feeling the slight jolt as he tried to force his way in, it terrified me. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I couldn't think straight. I didn't know if I should call the cops or try to confront him. I knew that if he got in, I wouldn't be able to handle him on my own. Before I could make up my mind, there was a loud thud against the door. I jumped back, the sound reverberating through the thin walls of the RV. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't leaving. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was something. I tried to steady my breath, but then the door suddenly flew open. He wasn't just trying to open it. He had forced his way in. He pushed through the door so hard that it slammed into the wall behind it. And then, there he was, standing in front of me. I was frozen for a moment. He was tall, probably around 6'2" or 6'3", wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His face was partially obscured by the hood, but I could make out a couple of tattoos on his neck. His eyes were wide, almost wild. I didn't even think. I just reacted. I swung the flashlight as hard as I could, connecting with his shoulder. He grunted, stumbling back, but he didn't fall. He grabbed my wrist with one hand, trying to yank the flashlight away from me. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I just knew I had to get away from him. I kicked, trying to break free, but he was stronger. His grip tightened on my arm, and I felt panic rise in my chest. That's when I saw it, a small kitchen knife on the counter, just a few feet away. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed it, my hand trembling, and with all the force I could muster, I stabbed toward his chest. I don't know if it hit him, but it was enough to make him pull back. He cursed under his breath and backed toward the door, looking almost surprised that I'd fought back. I wasn't waiting for him to think it over. I slammed the door shut as hard as I could and locked it. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone, dialing 911. I didn't even know if he was still out there, but I wasn't taking any chances. The cops arrived within 20 minutes, but by then, the man was gone. They found a few footprints in the dirt outside. That was it. No sign of him. I ended up leaving the campground the next morning. I didn't feel safe there anymore, and I wasn't sure I'd ever feel safe staying alone in an RV again. Every time I think about it, my heart races. I keep wondering, what would have happened if I hadn't fought back? I don't know if this guy was just some random creep or if he had other plans, but I can tell you one thing. I'll never take my safety for granted again. To anyone out there who camps or travels alone, please be cautious. There's always someone out there watching, waiting for an opportunity. And when that opportunity comes, it's up to you to make sure you're ready. My name's Brian Patel, and this happened to me in the National Forest in Oregon. I grew up in Portland and spent most weekends hiking the trails with my dad. After he passed away, I kept the tradition alive, even though the solitude wasn't quite the same. I wasn't the sentimental type, but being out there brought some quiet to my otherwise loud, chaotic life as an electrician. That particular weekend, and I'd planned a 2-day solo trek, something to clear my head and test out some new gear. I wasn't an ultralight fanatic or anything, but I liked keeping things minimal. Just me, the trail, and whatever nature threw at me. My route started at Timberline Lodge and cut through some backcountry trails that didn't see much traffic. It was early morning when I set out, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a map in the other. The first few hours were uneventful. The trails were damp from rain earlier in the week, and the scent of pine mixed with the occasional waft of mushrooms kept things pleasant. Around noon, I passed an older couple hiking with trekking poles. They waved but didn't stop to chat, which was fine by me. Solitude was the point. It was late afternoon when I noticed the first odd thing. I'd stopped at a clearing to refill my water from a nearby creek. The silence was too perfect. No birds, no rustling, nothing. It wasn't unusual for animals to scatter when a human came stomping through, but this was eerie, like the forest was holding its breath. I joked to myself that maybe I'd finally reached that perfect peace people were always yapping about in self-help books. As I climbed higher into the denser part of the forest, the feeling lingered. Every so often, I'd hear a snapping twig or see a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, but I chalked it up to squirrels or deer. That changed when I reached the ridge. There was a campsite up there, or at least what was left of one. A collapsed tent lay flattened against the dirt, its poles bent at odd angles. Gear was scattered around like someone had emptied a backpack in a panic. What caught my attention was the cooler, one of those sturdy, bear-resistant kinds. Its lid was wrenched open, and deep claw marks gouged the plastic. I didn't recognize the pattern. It didn't look like bear claws. Whatever did it had talons. I poked around cautiously. A jacket with a name tag, Franklin, hung on a low branch, ripped down the middle like someone had tried to peel it off. That's when I saw the blood. Not a lot, but enough to know something had gone wrong. My stomach tightened. I didn't consider myself squeamish, but the combination of the silence and the blood made the air feel heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I didn't linger. I wasn't about to play hero and investigate further, but I also didn't want to turn back the way I'd come. The campsite had a bad vibe, and if someone was injured, I wasn't eager to meet whatever or whoever had caused it. I decided to push forward toward a secondary trailhead about 5 miles out. It wasn't on my original route, but it would get me out of there quicker. The trail narrowed as I descended into a gully. Thick undergrowth swallowed most of the light, and the temperature seemed to drop. My boots squelched in the damp earth as I pushed past ferns that slapped against my legs. About halfway down, I caught a foul odor, like rotting meat mixed with damp fur. My first thought was a dead animal, maybe a cougar kill left to rot, but it was strong enough to make my eyes water. Then I heard it, a low, deep rumbling noise that didn't sound natural. It wasn't a growl, but it wasn't mechanical either. It reverberated through the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I chose the third option, freeze. I crouched low, scanning the trees, my heart hammering in my chest. The noise came again, closer this time, followed by the crunch of heavy footsteps. I forced myself to move, creeping forward as quietly as possible. The trail curved ahead, and just as I rounded the bend, I saw it, or at least part of it. A massive, hulking shape loomed through the trees, crouched over something on the ground. Its limbs were grotesquely long, the joints bending in ways that didn't make sense. It had patches of wiry fur mottled with bare, pale skin. What struck me most was its posture, like a predator that had evolved to ambush. I stayed hidden behind a tree, trying not to breathe. Whatever it was feeding, its movements jerky and almost insect-like. The thing was tearing into something unrecognizable, its talons slicing through flesh with surgical precision. My stomach churned, and I fought the urge to retch. The smell was overwhelming. A sudden snap of a branch underfoot betrayed me. The creature's head shot up, swiveling unnaturally as it scanned for the source of the noise. I didn't get a clear view of its face, but I did see its teeth, rows of uneven serrated spikes that looked like they belonged in a shark, not on land. I bolted. Stealth be damned. I sprinted down the trail, branches clawing at my face and arms. The sound of pursuit was immediate, heavy footfalls crashing through the undergrowth. I didn't dare look back. My pack jostled against my shoulders as I weaved through the narrow trail, adrenaline pushing me faster than I thought possible. The trail forked ahead, and I veered left without thinking. Bad move. The path led to a dead end, a sheer drop-off into a ravine. My options were limited. Jump and risk breaking something, or turn and face the thing head-on. Neither seemed appealing. I scrambled up a boulder, hoping to gain some height and buy myself time. The creature burst through the trees moments later, its gangly frame silhouetted against the dim light. Up close, it was worse. Its skin was stretched too tight over its bones, and its movements were unnervingly smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking. It paused, tilting its head as if deciding whether I was worth the effort. I fumbled for the small knife in my pocket, knowing it was more symbolic than anything. The creature lunged forward, and I did the only thing I could. I threw my pack at it. The motion startled it, and it recoiled briefly, giving me enough time to leap down the side of the ravine. I tumbled hard, dirt and rocks tearing at my clothes as I slid to the bottom. My ankle twisted painfully, but I managed to scramble to my feet. The creature didn't follow immediately, but I could hear it pacing above, its claws scraping against the rocks as it searched for another way down. I limped through the ravine, following the trickle of water downstream. My only thought was to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The ravine eventually opened up into a clearing, and I spotted a ranger's cabin in the distance. Relief surged through me, though it was tempered by the realization that I wasn't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively. The cabin was locked, but I found an axe leaning against the woodpile. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I crouched low, gripping the axe and scanning the tree line. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every rustle of leaves setting my nerves on edge. When it came, it was sudden. The creature barreled into the clearing, moving faster than seemed possible for its lanky frame. I swung the axe as it charged, catching it in the shoulder. The impact staggered it, but the thing didn't go down. It lashed out with its talons, grazing my arm and drawing blood. We circled each other, predator and prey, roles blurring. I swung again, aiming for its head this time. The blade connected with a sickening crunch, and the creature let out a piercing screech. It collapsed, twitching violently before going still. I didn't stick around to admire my handiwork. With my arm bleeding and my ankle screaming in pain, I limped back toward the trailhead, keeping an eye on the shadows. I flagged down the first car I saw, a bewildered couple who probably thought I'd lost my mind. Years later, I avoid Mount Hood. Not because I'm scared, but because I've learned to stick to places where nature follows the rules, or at least pretends to. I'm going to be honest with you. Being a cop in a small town isn't glamorous. It's not like the movies where every day is a shootout or a high-speed chase. It's mostly handling neighbor disputes over where someone's fence ends or someone's dog barking too much. My name's Lucas Giroux, and I've been wearing the badge for 9 years here in Chesterville, Louisiana. Population about 2,000, give or take. I love this town. It's quiet, peaceful for the most part, and I like that. My days are usually filled with mundane tasks, which suits me just fine. I didn't sign up to be some action hero, but that was before what happened in 2014. That night, everything changed. Chesterville sits on the edge of Lake Vere, a slow-moving body of water surrounded by cypress trees and swampland. People here fish, drink, and go about their lives. It was a pretty uneventful Thursday evening. I was sitting in the patrol car near the lake, enjoying the last of my coffee. That's when the call came through. Domestic disturbance, 14 miles out of town, near the edge of the bayou. Some old shack out there. Probably a drunk couple having a fight. I sighed, thinking about how cold my coffee was going to get by the time I got back. I could have ignored the call. In a town this small, people mostly resolve their issues on their own. But it's my job, and I'm not the kind of guy to leave a job half done. So I punched the gas and headed toward the edge of the swamp, the smell of rotting vegetation creeping into the car through the vents. The air always smells different out there. Heavy, like something's growing in the darkness. The address was off the main road, way off. I had to take a gravel path that was barely wide enough for my cruiser, with branches scraping against the sides like they were trying to keep me from going any further. The place was almost hidden behind thick trees, vines practically choking the building itself. It was an old, decaying wooden structure, more of a cabin than a house. When I stepped out of the car, everything felt wrong. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, but I shook it off. Maybe I was just on edge because it was so quiet. And in a town where quiet usually means safety, this felt different, like something was waiting. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. That's when I heard it, a scraping noise from inside, something heavy being dragged across the floor. I called out, "Chesterville PD, anyone home?" Still nothing. Now, I've dealt with drunks, domestic fights, and all sorts of noise complaints, but the sound coming from inside wasn't something I'd heard before. My hand instinctively went to my gun as I tried the doorknob. Locked. I circled the cabin, looking for another way in, when I noticed something strange, a set of footprints leading around the back. But not human ones. These prints were larger, clawed, like some kind of animal. But whatever made them was walking on two legs, and they were fresh. I was starting to think this wasn't just some domestic dispute. I followed the prints, feeling a chill in the pit of my stomach. As I reached the back of the cabin, I saw the door was ajar, hanging on its hinges. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell, like rotting meat mixed with damp earth. The cabin was small, just one room, with a dirty mattress on the floor and a table covered in old newspapers. But what caught my eye was the blood. It was smeared across the floor, thick and dark, leading to a corner where something was slumped. I shone the flashlight on it. It was a man, or what was left of him. His body had been torn apart, like he'd been mauled by something much bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in these parts. His chest was ripped open, ribs exposed, and his face, well, there wasn't much left to recognize. I barely had time to process the scene when I heard that same dragging noise again, but closer this time, coming from behind me. I turned, heart racing, and shone the light toward the sound. Something was moving in the shadows. Something big. At first I thought it was a bear, but bears don't move like that, and they sure as hell don't stand on two legs. It stepped into the light and I froze. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, with matted fur and a face that looked almost human, but twisted, distorted, like something halfway between a person and a wolf. Its claws were long, too long for anything natural, and its mouth was smeared with blood, teeth glistening like knives. I didn't hesitate. I drew my gun and fired, emptying the magazine into the thing's chest. But it barely flinched. The bullets hit, sure, but they didn't seem to do much more than piss it off. It let out this low sound, like it was irritated more than hurt, and took a step toward me. I backed up, reloading as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I've never been a great shot, but at this range, it didn't seem to matter. Nothing was going to stop this thing. It lunged. I dove out of the way, crashing into a shelf that sent bottles and cans scattering across the floor. My head was spinning, but I managed to scramble to my feet and run for the door. I don't know how, but I made it back to the car, slamming the door shut just as it slammed into the side of the cruiser, rocking it on its wheels. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud as I gunned it back down the gravel path. The thing didn't follow me. It just stood there, in the rearview mirror, watching. As I sped away, its shape slowly faded into the darkness of the swamp. When I finally reached the main road, I stopped, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had to call it in. But what the hell was I going to say? That some kind of monster tore a man apart and nearly killed me? I thought about it for a long moment, staring at the radio, before deciding to do something I never thought I'd do. I lied. When I called it in, I said I found the man already dead. Looked like some kind of animal attack. Maybe a bear, maybe a wild dog. Hell, maybe both. I didn't mention the thing I saw. I couldn't. No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. But here's the thing. I wasn't the only one out there that night. I found out later that 2 fishermen had been on the lake, close enough to the cabin to hear the gunshots. They saw something too. Something large, moving through the trees. They didn't get a good look at it, but they said it wasn't a bear. Wasn't anything they'd ever seen before. And they swore it walked on 2 legs. The next morning, I went back out there with the sheriff and a couple of deputies. We found the body, or what was left of it, but there was no sign of the creature. Just those same strange tracks leading off into the swamp. The sheriff wrote it up as an animal attack, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew something didn't add up. I've thought about that night a lot since then, about how close I came to ending up like that poor bastard in the cabin, and about what's still out there, lurking in the swamp. Some nights, when it's real quiet, I wonder if it's still watching. But I've learned not to go looking for answers. Sometimes, in a place like this, it's better to let the mysteries stay buried. My name is Kevin Scott. I was 32 years old when it happened. I'd been living out of my RV for the past 8 months, traveling across the country, writing about forgotten places and hidden gems. It was supposed to be an escape from my ex-wife, from my old life, from the custody battle I knew I was never going to win. This happened in Little Talbot Island, Florida. I picked the spot because it was quiet, off the beaten path, and beautiful in a way that most beaches weren't. No high-rises, no tourists, just rolling dunes, thick patches of forest, and the endless stretch of the Atlantic. Perfect for the kind of travel blog post I was planning. I pulled into the campsite late in the afternoon. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the sand. The ranger at the entrance had given me a strange look when I told him I was camping alone. "Storm's coming in," he said, eyeing the darkening sky. "Might want to stay closer to town." I shrugged it off. A little bad weather didn't scare me. I'd been through worse. I parked the RV in a secluded spot near the dunes, set up my gear, and spent the evening taking photos. As the sky darkened, a thick mist rolled in from the water, swallowing the landscape. It happened so fast, like a wave crashing over the dunes. Within minutes, the world beyond my headlights was gone. That's when I saw them. 2 pinpricks of red light, barely visible through the fog, hovering just above the dunes. At first, I thought they were taillights from another camper's vehicle, but they didn't move. They just watched. I blinked, and they were gone. I laughed to myself. Probably just my imagination. I'd been on the road too long. That night, I locked the doors and stretched out on the tiny bed in my RV, listening to the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. But sleep didn't come easy. At some point, I heard something, a soft, rhythmic scraping. I sat up, heart pounding. The sound came from outside, right next to the RV. I reached for my flashlight and crept toward the window, moving slowly, carefully. My breath fogged up the glass. I saw footprints in the sand. Large, deep, they circled the RV, stopping right at the door. I yanked the curtain shut. The next morning, I found something else. A message carved into the sand just a few feet from my RV. "Don't run." The letters were long, jagged, like they'd been made with something sharp. I took a photo, my hands shaking. Maybe some was messing with me. Maybe this was a local trying to scare off outsiders. Or maybe it was something else. I spent the afternoon hiking the trails, trying to shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. I kept telling myself there was a logical explanation. The wind, the tide, my own paranoia. But then I found the tent. It was buried beneath the dunes, half collapsed, the fabric shredded. Inside, there were old camping supplies, a torn sleeping bag, and a journal. The pages were damp, the ink smudged, but I could still read some of the entries. Something is watching me. Every night, it gets closer. I saw the eyes again. They never blink. I tried to leave, but the tide. I keep walking in circles. I don't know if it's me or this place, but I can't find my way out. It waits until I'm too tired to fight. I can hear it breathing. I closed the journal and stood there, heart hammering. Had someone else been here before me? Had they gotten out? As the sun set, I made a decision. I was leaving in the morning. That night, the power in my RV flickered. The radio crackled, the station tuning itself, static giving way to something else, a voice. My own voice. Stay, stay, stay. I lunged forward and turned the radio off. My reflection in the dark screen stared back at me, but for a split second, I swore. I swore I saw it blink. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it. Something just outside watching. At some point, I heard scratching. Not at the door. On the roof. Something was up there. I held my breath, gripping my pocket knife, listening as the slow, deliberate movement shifted above me, claws against metal. Then silence. Then a voice. My own voice, whispering from just beyond the RV. Mike, I didn't move. Mike, let me in. I pressed a hand over my mouth. It sounded exactly like me, like I was standing right outside. A shadow passed across the window. I didn't sleep after that. By sunrise, I was ready to go. I threw my things into the RV, turned the key. Nothing. The engine was dead. I sat there, breathing hard, trying to stay calm. I had jumper cables. I could fix this. I could get out. Then I heard footsteps, slow, dragging. I turned my head and saw them. The red eyes. Not just one pair. 3, 4, 5. They hovered above the dunes, blinking in and out of existence, moving closer. I grabbed my flare gun and bolted out the door. I ran, not toward the road, toward the beach. The tide was high, the waves crashing against the shore. If I could just make it to the water, maybe they wouldn't follow. Behind me, the footsteps grew faster. I turned, raised the flare gun, and fired. The light illuminated the dunes for just a moment, and I saw them. Tall, thin, moving wrong, like marionettes with their strings tangled. No faces, just those glowing red eyes. And long, gaping mouths. Then they screamed. The sound was worse than anything I'd ever heard. Worse than gunfire. Worse than sirens. Worse than the worst moments of my life. I turned and sprinted for the water. Then, nothing. The next thing I remember, I was in a fishing boat. An old man shaking me awake. "Jesus, son," he muttered. "What the hell were you doing out there?" I looked back at the shore, but the beach was empty, the dunes undisturbed. They were gone. Or maybe they had never left. I never went back for my RV, never even tried. I didn't care about my gear, my laptop, my camera. Because when I checked my phone later, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photo. The last picture I had taken. Me, standing on the beach. And behind me, half visible through the mist, the red eyes, watching. I don't know what they are, but I know they're still there. My name is Bobby Stevens, and this happened to me back in 2000 in Juneau, Alaska, when I thought I'd figured out the best way to escape the chaos of city life. Buy a cabin off the grid, live like Thoreau, and grow an impressive beard. Turns out, I'm not exactly a survivalist, and that beard never really came in. I'd been living in that cabin for about 2 months, wrestling with basic tasks like chopping wood without chopping my foot and getting a fire started without fumbling through half a box of matches. But I liked the solitude, until I started hearing the hum. It wasn't every night, just sporadically. A low, mechanical thrum that vibrated in my chest like a subwoofer cranked too high. At first, I thought it might be the wind against the peaks or some kind of machinery echoing from the city miles away. I even made a joke to myself, maybe Sasquatch got a generator. That night, though, the hum became a roar. My cabin shook, not like an earthquake, but more like the structure itself was resonating. I stumbled outside, bare feet crunching on the frosty gravel, and that's when I saw it. Hovering over the tree line was something enormous, metallic, and, if I'm being honest, uglier than anything I'd ever imagined could fly. It wasn't sleek or aerodynamic, just a mass of haphazardly connected shapes, glowing with what looked like molten gold veins running through their hulls. It didn't zip or glide. It hovered, pulsating, as if deciding what to do next. And then it chose. A beam of light blasted down, not the kind that sweeps around like in old sci-fi movies, but sharp, focused, and immediate. Before I could duck or even think, I was in it, lifted clean off the ground like a rag doll. My first thought wasn't alien abduction. It was, this is the worst way to die, barefoot. The next thing I knew, I was inside. It smelled sterile, but not in a hospital way, more like someone had scrubbed everything with ammonia and forgot to rinse. The walls pulsed faintly, that same molten glow I'd seen outside, tracing patterns that seemed to shift the more I stared. I wasn't alone. There were two of them. The closest alien stood about 8'2", shaped like someone had stretched a human silhouette until it was all wrong. Thin as a rake, its limbs too long, with elbows that bent backward like a praying mantis. Its skin was textured like polished onyx, shimmering faintly under the light. The face, or what I assumed was the face, had no features, just smooth blackness. It looked at me, or at least turned toward me, and a voice filled my head, clear as if someone were speaking directly into my brain. "Do not be alarmed. You are unharmed." "Yeah, I can see that," I blurted. Sarcasm apparently is my default even under threat of dissection. Nothing says unharmed like yanking someone out of their yard without consent. The alien tilted its head, almost like a dog hearing a strange noise, then spoke again. "You are a sample. Analysis is required." "Sample? Buddy, I'm not an Amazon return." The other alien, slightly shorter but bulkier, with limbs like an insect's exoskeleton, approached, carrying something that looked a lot like a scalpel. If scalpels came in 3 parts and vibrated. It didn't even try for pleasantries. It pressed the blade to my shoulder, and I howled. Not in pain, at least not physical, but in a sound that ripped through my thoughts. They weren't cutting my flesh. They were cutting into my mind. Images flashed, moments I barely remembered. A spelling bee I won in 3rd grade. My first failed attempt to ask someone to prom. The time I accidentally set the toaster on fire trying to melt marshmallows. Each memory felt like it was being yanked out, examined, then tossed aside. "Stop it!" I screamed, but my voice barely echoed in the chamber. The taller alien responded. "Your species' resilience is sufficient. Behavioral anomalies detected." "Behavioral anomalies?" I shouted. "I cried during Homeward Bound. That doesn't make me an anomaly." The shorter alien finally spoke, or at least communicated, but its tone was harsher, angrier, like static interrupting a bad signal. "You are defective. Others will replace." I didn't like the sound of replace. Before I could overthink it, I lunged, swiping at the shorter alien with pure, stupid adrenaline. My hand connected with its strange scalpel, sending it flying across the chamber. The taller alien responded instantly, extending its unnervingly long arms to pin me. Except I wasn't having it. I twisted, bringing one knee up into what I prayed was its weak spot. It crumpled slightly but didn't let go. "You will not interfere," it declared, its voice pressing into my skull like a migraine. "Yeah? Watch me." I spat. The chamber shifted suddenly, lurching sideways as if the entire ship had been struck. Alarms blared, a sound more grating than any fire drill I'd ever suffered. The shorter alien hissed something incomprehensible, rushing toward a panel covered in glowing symbols. That's when I spotted them. Cages. Lining the wall behind me were dozens of transparent containers, each filled with human bodies, limp but breathing. Some were kids, others elderly, most somewhere in between. My stomach twisted. These weren't just samples. These were people. "Release them!" I yelled, yanking against the taller alien's grip. It ignored me, focused on whatever crisis the ship was facing. The moment its grip slackened, I bolted toward the cages, searching for any way to open them. My hands fumbled against a panel covered in alien symbols, slapping buttons wildly. I must have hit the right one, because the cages hissed open, and bodies started sliding out to act like they'd been spit up by the machine. Not all of them woke up. The ones that did stared at me, their eyes wide and unfocused, as if their minds hadn't fully reconnected to their bodies. One man, a middle-aged guy with a scraggly beard, grabbed my arm and muttered, "Where? What?" "No time," I barked. "We're getting out of here." The shorter alien screeched, a sound so high-pitched it felt like my skull might split. It lunged toward us. But this time, I was ready. Grabbing the closest thing I could, a chunk of metallic tubing, I swung it with everything I had. The impact sent the alien staggering backward, black ichor dripping from what I assumed was its arm. "Move," I shouted, shoving the freed captives toward what looked like an exit. The taller alien intercepted us, its limbs extending unnaturally to block the path. The shorter one was recovering, its vibrating blade back in hand. Desperation kicked in. I didn't have a plan. Just raw panic and the kind of reckless courage that comes from having absolutely nothing to lose. I hurled the tubing at the taller alien, then dove toward the control panel where the shorter one had been working. Symbols glowed and flickered, and I jabbed at them, praying I wasn't about to blow us all to smithereens. The ship jolted violently, tilting us sideways. The shorter alien screeched again, its blades skittering across the floor. One of the freed captives, a wiry teenager, grabbed the weapon and drove it into the alien's chest. Black liquid sprayed. The creature collapsed, twitching. "Gross," the kid muttered, tossing the blade aside. The taller alien turned toward the chaos, momentarily distracted. I seized the chance, slamming another button on the panel. A hatch opened behind us, revealing a tunnel of blinding white light. "Run!" I screamed. We dove through, one by one, tumbling onto cold, rocky ground. Behind us, the ship shuddered, emitting a deafening hum, before it shot skyward, vanishing into the night. We weren't alone. Bodies littered the forest clearing, some mangled beyond recognition, others eerily pristine. The survivors stared in stunned silence, the weight of what we had just escaped sinking in. Later, investigators swarmed the area, documenting the carnage. Autopsies revealed surgical scars and strange metallic implants in the deceased. Authorities claimed it was a cult gone wrong, a mass delusion fueled by hysteria. They didn't believe us. But I saw the symbols, the cages, the ichor-stained blade. And I know this. Whatever those things were, they weren't done collecting. My name is Kevin Scott. I'm 31 years old, and I swear to God, everything I'm about to tell you is real. It happened 2 years ago in the middle of Green Swamp Wilderness Preserve, Florida. I wish I had listened to the warning. It started as a weekend trip, just 4 of us. Me, my old Army buddy Travis, my best friend Ryan, and his girlfriend Jessie. Ryan was obsessed with urban legends, always chasing cryptid stories and internet horror nonsense. He had been talking for weeks about La Bruja, a swamp witch that supposedly haunted the backwoods of Florida, stealing souls and driving people insane. I should have told him to shut up and pick a normal vacation spot. We set off in Travis's beat-up RV, a clunky relic that rattled like a tin can every time we hit a pothole. The trip was supposed to be fun. Campfires, fishing, and beers under the stars. Just some time away from the city. Instead, it became the worst night of my life. The first sign of trouble came before we even got there. At a gas station just outside the swamp, an old man sitting on the porch stared at us like we were already dead. He spat into a tin cup and said, "Y'all ain't got no business out there." Ryan, grinning like an idiot, asked if he believed in the stories. The old man's face darkened. Once you hear the singing, it's already too late. Travis laughed it off. Jessie rolled her eyes. I felt something tighten in my chest. We drove into the wilderness, deeper than I liked. No cell signal, no GPS. After a while, just miles of swamp, trees like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. It was nearly sunset when we finally parked the RV in a clearing by the water. The first thing I noticed? The silence. No birds, no bugs, not even the hum of mosquitoes. Just dead air, thick with humidity and something I couldn't name. We set up a fire, cooked some canned chili, and cracked open a few beers. The tension eased. Even I started to relax. Then, just after midnight, Ryan disappeared. I woke up to Jessie shaking me. "Kevin, Scott's gone." The fire was just smoldering embers, casting long shadows on the trees. Travis sat up, groggy, rubbing his face. We found Ryan's boots and clothes neatly folded on a log near the water. His camera was still there, turned off. No tracks leading away. No sound. Jessie panicked. "We need to look for him, now." Hell no, I said. We wait until morning. We don't go into the swamp at night. But she wasn't listening. She grabbed a flashlight and stormed off. Travis and I had no choice but to follow. The deeper we went, the more wrong everything felt. The trees started to look the same, like we were walking in circles. My watch said 2:14 a.m., but the moon hadn't moved. Then we heard it, a woman humming, soft, eerie, like an old lullaby. Travis froze. That ain't Jessie. The light from Jessie's flashlight flickered in the distance. She screamed. We ran toward her, found her standing in a knee-deep pool of water, shaking. I saw him. Ryan? She nodded. He was standing right there. But his eyes were black, pitch black. He smiled at me. I turned my flashlight on the water. Nothing, just ripples. Travis grabbed my arm. Kevin, I turned. A woman was standing in the trees. She was impossibly tall, skin stretched tight over her bones. Her face was wrong, her mouth too wide, her fingers too long, and her eyes, black pits. Empty. She smiled. The flashlight died. Something yanked Travis into the water. He screamed, thrashing as unseen hands pulled him under. I lunged, grabbed his arm. Jessie screamed beside me. I pulled hard. Something let go. Travis gasped, coughing up swamp water, but his back was covered in deep claw marks, bleeding through his shirt. We ran. Somehow, we made it back to the RV. We barricaded ourselves inside, locked the doors, closed the curtains. Jessie sobbed. Travis groaned in pain. I checked the gashes on his back. They weren't just wounds. They were symbols. Then Ryan knocked on the door. Jessie moved to unlock it, but I grabbed her wrist. Look at his eyes, I whispered. Through the window, I saw him standing in the moonlight, smiling, too wide, his black eyes gleaming. Let me in, guys, he said. His voice layered. His and something else. Jessie broke. It's him. We have to let him in. Travis, still weak, just muttered, Don't. I grabbed my knife. Ryan kept knocking, louder, then pounding. I stepped forward, gripping the handle, my heart slamming in my chest. Then Ryan stopped. Silence. I peeked out the window. Gone. We didn't sleep. Every few minutes, I swore I heard whispering outside, soft laughter, scratching on the walls. Around dawn, Jessie had had enough. She grabbed a backpack. I'm going for help. I grabbed her arm. No, you're not. She shook me off. I can't stay in here, Kevin. I can't. She ran outside before I could stop her. She screamed. I bolted after her. Nothing. Just her flashlight on the ground. She was gone. Vanished. Travis and I sat there in stunned silence. I wanted to cry, to scream, but I couldn't. Then Ryan came back. He walked right out of the trees, smiling, naked except for his jeans. His eyes normal again, his voice his own. What's wrong? He asked. You guys look like you've seen a ghost. Travis whispered, No. I clenched my knife. Where's Jessie? Ryan tilted his head. Who's Jessie? My stomach dropped. Travis lost it. He grabbed a tire iron and swung at Ryan, but Ryan moved too fast, too fluid. He caught the iron mid-swing. Smiled. Don't do that, buddy. I grabbed Travis and dragged him back toward the RV. We locked the door, boarded up the windows with what little we had left. Ryan sat outside, just sat there, smiling, and night fell again. Travis stopped responding. He was burning up, feverish, and then the humming started again. Ryan started laughing. I heard Jessie's voice whisper through the walls. Kevin, let me in. I closed my eyes, held my breath. At some point, Travis stopped breathing. Morning came. Ryan was gone. Travis was cold. I didn't wait any longer. I ran through the swamp, not stopping, not caring what was behind me. I ran until I saw a road. A trucker found me, half crazed, covered in mud and blood. They never found Travis's body, or Jessie's. They did find the RV, though. The doors ripped off. The inside, covered in deep claw marks. And Ryan? He was on the news a week later, found wandering near the swamp. No memory of what happened. He doesn't remember me. But sometimes I wake up at night and I hear the humming. My name is Timothy Perez, and in 2015, I ventured to Isle Royale in Michigan to escape the bustle of city life. I'd always been the kind of guy who preferred the whisper of the trees over the honking of horns, and this remote island seemed like the perfect getaway. I arrived on a chilly morning, the kind where your breath fogs up like a bad magic trick. The ferry ride over Lake Superior was uneventful, save for an older gentleman who warned me about the island's unpredictable weather. If you don't like it, he chuckled, just wait 6 minutes. I laughed it off, thinking I'd heard that joke in every town I'd ever visited. Isle Royale was everything I hoped it would be. dense forests, crystal clear lakes, and trails that seemed to stretch on forever. I set up camp near Rock Harbor, not far from where the ferry had dropped me off. The plan was simple: hike, take photos, and maybe find some inspiration for the novel I'd been pretending to write for years. You know, the one where the hero saves the world and gets the girl, all while maintaining perfect hair. On my second day, I met a group of hikers: Tom, Lisa, and their teenage son Max. They were from Chicago and had that Midwestern friendliness that makes you feel like you've known them for years. We exchanged pleasantries, and they invited me to join them for dinner at their campsite. Never one to turn down free food, especially when my options were dwindling packets of instant noodles, I gladly accepted. As we sat around the campfire that evening, roasting marshmallows and swapping stories, Tom shared tales about the island's wildlife. "They say the wolves here are some of the most elusive creatures you'll never see," he said, poking the fire with a stick. "Maybe they're just introverted," I quipped. "Can't blame them for wanting some peace and quiet." Max rolled his eyes. "Dad thinks every rustle in the bushes is a wolf waiting to pounce." "Better safe than sorry," Lisa interjected, smiling warmly. The night sky was a canvas of stars, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Little did I know that would be the last time things felt normal. The next morning, we decided to hike together to Mount Ojibwe, one of the island's higher points, promising breathtaking views. As we trekked through the forest, conversations flowed easily. Max complained about not having seltzers. Tom told another one of his infamous dad jokes: "Why don't oysters donate to charity?" "Because they're shellfish." And Lisa kept us all in line with her motherly charm. About halfway up, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned ranger station. It looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since flip phones were cutting-edge technology. Curious, we decided to take a look inside. The door creaked ominously. Classic horror movie stuff, I know. The interior was sparse: a broken chair, a desk with outdated maps, and a musty smell that could have been bottled and sold as ode to neglect. Max found a faded journal tucked in a drawer. Flipping through it, his face paled. "Listen to this," he said. "June 5th, 1998, sightings of an unknown animal have increased. Rangers advised to travel in pairs. 2 hikers reported missing." "Probably just old campfire stories," I suggested, trying to lighten the mood. "Or maybe the previous ranger had an overactive imagination." Tom shrugged. "Still, maybe we should stick together. Safety in numbers, right?" We continued our hike, but the atmosphere had shifted. The forest seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. Even the birds had ceased their chatter. I joked that they must be on a union-mandated break, but no one laughed. Reaching the summit, the view was as spectacular as promised. Lake Superior stretched out endlessly, its waters glistening under the midday sun. We ate lunch in relative silence, the earlier unease still lingering. On our way back, we noticed something odd. The forest floor, which had been carpeted with leaves and twigs, now showed signs of disturbance. Deep gashes marred the trees, and patches of ground looked as though they'd been clawed by something large. "Probably a bear," Tom speculated, though his voice lacked conviction. "Do bears even live on this island?" Lisa asked, her eyes wide. "Mostly wolves and moose," I replied, "but I've never heard of moose doing this." Max snapped a few pictures. "Maybe we'll go viral," he said, attempting a grin. "Teen documents mysterious forest creature. Click here to find out what happens next." "Let's keep moving," Tom suggested, picking up the pace. As we neared the split where we'd go our separate ways, me back to Rock Harbor, them to their campsite, Tom placed a hand on my shoulder. "You sure you don't want to join us for dinner again?" I smiled. "Thanks, but I think I'll turn in early tonight. Besides, I can't mooch off you guys forever." Lisa handed me a walkie-talkie. "Just in case. Channel 6, we'd feel better knowing we can reach you." I accepted it gratefully. "Thanks, I'll be fine. What's the worst that could happen?" We parted ways, and I headed back to my tent. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that danced eerily among the trees. I told myself I was being ridiculous. After all, I came here to escape stress, not invent new reasons for it. Settling into my tent, I decided to review the photos I had taken. Scrolling through the images, one caught my eye. It was from the summit, a panoramic shot. But there, among the trees, was a dark shape that hadn't been there before. Zooming in didn't help. It only made the image grainier. "Probably just a trick of the light," I muttered. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional snap of a twig. Nothing out of the ordinary. I crawled into my sleeping bag, grateful for its warmth. Sometime later, I awoke to a faint crackling sound. At first I thought it was rain, but the sky had been clear. Then I smelled it. Smoke. Unzipping my tent, I peeked outside to see a small fire burning near the tree line. That's not supposed to be there, I thought. Grabbing my flashlight, I cautiously approached. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a random blaze. It was a campfire. Around it lay scattered belongings: a backpack, a hat, a hiking boot. No signs of people, though. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" Silence. I noticed the backpack had a name tag, Kevin Moore. Rifling through it seemed invasive, but I was concerned someone might be hurt. Inside, I found the usual: water bottle, trail mix, a map, but also a journal. Flipping it open, the last entry read, "Something is following me. I can hear it at night. If anyone finds this." A chill ran down my spine. Not the figurative kind people write about, but a genuine, icy dread. Then, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. I decided to head back to my tent when the radio crackled. Just then, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, echoing through the forest. It was human, filled with terror, and abruptly cut off. I sprinted back to my campsite, hands shaking as I fumbled with the walkie-talkie. "Tom, Lisa, do you copy? Stam? Max? Anyone?" Finally, a crackling response. "Timothy, what's going on?" I heard a scream near my camp. Found someone's gear, but no person. Something's not right. "Stay put. We're on our way," Tom replied. Minutes felt like hours as I waited. I kept the flashlight beam moving, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Then, in the periphery of the light, I saw it. A massive silhouette lurking between the trees. It moved with a fluidity that was unnerving for something its size. I pointed the flashlight directly at it. The creature resembled a wolf, but stood upright like a human. Its fur was a mottled mix of grays and blacks. Its snout was elongated, teeth glinting as it snarled, eyes fixed on me. It let out a sound that was somewhere between a howl and a roar. My mind raced. This can't be real, I thought. Did someone spike my trail mix? Fight or flight kicked in, and flight won by a landslide. I bolted in the direction I hoped was toward Tom and Lisa. Behind me, I heard the creature crashing through the underbrush, gaining ground despite my adrenaline-fueled sprint. Ahead, I saw the beam of another flashlight. "Timothy!" Perez's voice shouted. "Run!" I yelled. "Go back!" But it was too late. The creature lunged between us, grabbing Max with clawed hands. He screamed as it dragged him into the darkness. "Max!" Lisa shrieked, dropping to her knees. Tom grabbed her arm. "We have to move!" I stood there, paralyzed by shock. Tom shook me. "Timothy, we need to get to safety now!" We stumbled through the forest, the creature's guttural sounds echoing behind us. Reaching a rocky outcrop, we wedged ourselves into a narrow crevice. The creature couldn't fit but clawed at the entrance, its razor-like nails scraping against the stone. Lisa was sobbing uncontrollably. Tom held her, his face a mask of despair. "We have to do something," I whispered. "And what do you suggest?" Tom snapped. "Offered a s'more?" Despite the dire situation, a hysterical laugh bubbled up. "I always knew camping was a bad idea," I muttered. "Next time, I'm sticking to Netflix and chill." "Assuming there is a next time," Tom retorted. Hours seemed to pass as we huddled together. The creature eventually retreated, but we could hear it pacing nearby, waiting. "We can't stay here forever," Lisa whispered. "At dawn, we'll make a run for the ranger station," Tom decided. "Assuming that place is still standing," I added. Morning light filtered in, and the forest took on an almost serene appearance, betraying the horrors of the night. We cautiously emerged, every snap of a twig making us jump. The trek to the ranger station was tense but uneventful. When we arrived, the place looked as abandoned as before, but it was our only hope. Inside, we found an old radio. Tom fiddled with it. Come on, he urged. Static." Then a voice. "This is Ranger Dispatch. Identify yourself." "Help, we're at the old ranger station on Isle Royale. Something attacked us. Our friend is missing," Tom blurted out. "Stay where you are. We're dispatching a team," the voice replied. Hours passed, each minute stretching longer than the last. Suddenly, the door burst open. Not rescuers, the creature. It had tracked us. It lunged at Tom, who tried to fend it off with a rusted fire poker. "Get Lisa out of here," he shouted. I grabbed Lisa's hand, pulling her toward the back door. "We can't leave him," she protested. We don't have a choice. As we stumbled outside, a gunshot rang out. Startled, we turned to see Tom standing over the creature, a flare gun in his hands. The beast writhed on the floor, momentarily incapacitated. Didn't think that would actually work, Tom said, breathing heavily. We didn't waste time celebrating. Together, we ran toward the shoreline, hoping to signal any passing boats. Reaching the water's edge, we waved frantically as a ferry appeared in the distance. Behind us, the creature emerged once more, smoke still rising from its singed fur. It was wounded but relentless. Keep going, Tom urged. As the ferry drew closer, a group of park rangers aboard spotted us and the creature. They shouted orders we couldn't make out, but their raised rifles were a welcome sight. A volley of shots rang out. The creature let out a final, agonized howl before collapsing. The rangers escorted us onto the ferry. One of them, a stern-looking woman named Officer Delgado, questioned us about the incident. "You're lucky to be alive," she said. "We've had reports of missing hikers, but nothing concrete until now." "What was that thing?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Delgado exchanged glances with her team. "We've got some theories, but nothing official. The island has its secrets." Back on the mainland, we gave our statements to the authorities. They assured us they'd investigate further, but something in their eyes told me they weren't expecting to find anything. A week later, news reports surfaced about the discovery of remains on Isle Royale, bones that didn't quite match any known species. Experts were baffled, speculating everything from undiscovered wildlife to elaborate hoaxes. As for Max, he was never found. A memorial service was held, but closure remained elusive. In the end, the island was closed to the public indefinitely. Official statements cited environmental concerns, but we knew better. I returned to city life, as the noise and crowds now a strange comfort. Occasionally, I'd catch myself scanning the headlines, looking for any mention of unexplained events in remote places. One day, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a journal, the same one I'd found at the abandoned camp. How it got to me, I had no idea. Attached was a note. "Thought you might want this, Officer Delgado." Flipping through the pages, I noticed new entries in handwriting that wasn't mine. They detailed sightings of creatures across various national parks, all eerily similar to what we'd encountered. It seemed the island wasn't the only place hiding secrets. I closed the journal and stared out the window at the cityscape. Maybe isolation wasn't the escape I thought it would be. My name is Austin Gibson. I'm 42 years old, and I swear on everything I have left that what happened in Apalachicola National Forest was real. I don't drink anymore. I can't, because every time I do, I see that thing's face grinning back at me in the dark. I drove my old RV into the forest a few years ago, thinking I needed some time alone after the divorce. I wasn't sleeping much. My hands shook if I wasn't holding a beer. My ex-wife Lisa said I needed help, but what I needed was space. Silence. So I packed up took a few cases of whiskey, and drove out to the deepest part of Apalachicola, where no one would bother me. The road was bad, worse than I expected. The deeper I went, the more the trees closed in, thick moss hanging from the branches like dead fingers. I didn't see another car for miles. That's how I wanted it. Just me, the swamp, and enough liquor to make me forget why I was out there in the first place. I found a clearing near the water and parked. No cell service, no radio reception, just the sound of frogs and the occasional rustling in the brush. The air was thick, humid as hell, and the sun was already sinking. The first thing that went wrong was the RV's battery. I killed the engine, went outside to take a leak, and when I came back, the lights wouldn't turn on. No power, no reason for it either. The damn thing had been fine all the way there. I figured I'd deal with it in the morning. That night, I sat by the fire, drinking, trying not to think about Lisa or the divorce, or the fact that I had nowhere to go when I got back. Then the knocking started. Soft, like fingertips against the metal. I turned my head slowly toward the RV. Nothing. Probably a branch, I told myself. Or an animal. I went inside, locking the door behind me. I lay down on the small cot, listening. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. It was coming from the other side now, near the back window. I grabbed my flashlight and yanked open the curtain. Nothing but darkness. I shut the curtain, turned over, and tried to sleep. At some point in the night, the radio turned on. It hadn't worked in years. The damn thing was busted, fried from an old battery issue. But now it crackled with static. And through it, a song started playing. Lisa used to love that song. But the lyrics were wrong. The voice singing was off, slow, stretched, like someone mimicking a record player at half speed. I yanked the power knob. The music stopped. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I went outside to check the engine. That's when I saw the footprints. Not mine. They circled the RV, stopping right outside my window. Bare footprints, too long, like the toes had been stretched out. I told myself it was some local screwing with me, someone trying to scare me off. I decided I'd had enough of that spot, so I packed up to leave. Got in the driver's seat, turned the key. Nothing. The RV wouldn't start. I opened the hood, checked the wires. Everything looked fine, but it was like the engine was just dead, like the damn thing had given up. I was stuck. That's when I saw the man in the trees, far off, just standing between the pines, his head tilted, watching me. I called out, but he didn't move. I took a step forward. "Hey, buddy, you lost?" He took a step back, fading into the shadows. I ran toward where he had been, but by the time I got there, the trees were empty. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. I went back to camp, locking myself in the RV even though I knew that wouldn't do much. I spent the rest of the day trying to fix the engine, trying to find some rational explanation. Then the knocking came back. But this time, it was coming from the door. I froze. Knock, knock, knock. I swallowed hard, gripping the handle of my knife. Who's there? Silence. Then a voice. Low calm. "Danny." My breath hitched. "Lisa." I backed away from the door. The handle rattled. "Danny, let me in." My hands shook. My head felt light. I hadn't spoken to Lisa in weeks. She wasn't here. She couldn't be here. I peeked out the window. She was standing there. Lisa, in the blue dress she wore the night she left me. Her hair down. Her lips curled in that soft little smile she used to give me when we were happy. I squeezed my eyes shut. I was hallucinating. The booze, the stress, that was all it was. When I opened my eyes, she was closer, right outside the window, smiling, too wide, her lips curled back, revealing too many teeth. I screamed and threw myself back. The knocking stopped. I didn't open the door. I didn't sleep. The next day, I tried to hike out. No matter how far I walked, I always ended up back at the RV. By sunset, I was losing my mind. Then the park ranger showed up. He came walking down the path like nothing was wrong, clipboard in hand. "You lost, sir?" I ran up to him. "Jesus, man, you gotta help me. My RV's dead. Then I saw his badge. Holloway, my last name. I stepped back. "What the hell?" He just smiled. "You're not supposed to be here, Danny." I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, but no matter which way I went, I always ended up back at that damn RV. That night, the radio came on again. This time, it wasn't music. It was a voice, deep, laughing. "You're almost ready to let go." I covered my ears. "Shut up. Shut the hell up." The mirror in the RV cracked, and my own face smiled back at me. "Danny," it whispered. "You know why she left." I backed away, shaking. No. You were driving drunk. The air went out of my lungs. "You crashed." I shook my head. No, she left me." My reflection grinned wider. She didn't leave. She never left. And then I remembered. The rain that night, the headlights spinning, the crunch of metal. I never called the cops. I passed out, woke up in the wreckage, stumbled home, convinced myself she'd just left. But she was still out there, somewhere in the swamp, buried. I fell to my knees, my head in my hands. The voice whispered in my ear, "You can stay here, Danny, or you can let go." I don't know what made me do it, but I grabbed the bottle of whiskey and smashed it against the RV's floor. I lit a match. The fire spread fast. The voice screamed. The last thing I saw before I passed out, Lisa, standing in the flames, smiling. I woke up on the side of the road. My truck was there. The road was dry. The sky was clear. I drove out of that forest and never looked back. But sometimes, at night, I hear the knocking. And when I look in the mirror, I see my own face, smiling back. My name is Randy Smith, and back in 2018, I decided to take my RV up to Lake Superior Provincial Park in Ontario for some peace and quiet. Being cooped up in the city was starting to make me feel like a sardine in a can, and I figured some fresh air might do me good. Besides, I've always believed that nature and I have an understanding. I don't bother it, and it doesn't bother me. I've never been the rugged outdoorsman type. My idea of hiking involves a well-marked trail and a picnic at the end. but the allure of the open road and the promise of solitude were too tempting to pass up. So I packed my essentials, a week's worth of snacks, a stack of books I'd been meaning to read, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. The drive was picturesque, with the trees flaunting their autumn colors like they were showing off. By the time I reached the park, the sun was casting golden hues over the lake, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I found a secluded spot near the water, set up camp, and made myself a cup of coffee. This isn't so bad, I thought. Maybe I should write a book, Randy's Adventures in the Wild. As dusk settled, I decided to light a campfire. There's something hypnotic about watching flames dance. It's like nature's television. I was roasting marshmallows, because what's a camping trip without s'mores? When I heard footsteps crunching leaves behind me. "Evening," a voice said. I turned to see a man standing at the edge of my campsite. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they'd been through a war zone. His eyes had a peculiar glint, one that made me instinctively uneasy. "Evening," I replied cautiously. "Can I help you with something?" "Just passing through," he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Jedediah, but folks call me Jed." "Randy," I offered, though he hadn't asked. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" He stepped closer, eyeing the marshmallows. "Sure is. Mind if I join you for a bit?" Every alarm bell in my head was ringing, but I didn't want to be rude. Actually, I was just about to turn in, long drive and all. He tilted his head, the smile fading. "Fair enough. You take care now." "Will do," I said, watching as he disappeared into the shadows. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Well, that wasn't creepy at all," I muttered, deciding it was indeed time to call it a night. I extinguished the fire and secured the RV. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds chirping and the smell of pine. I convinced myself that I'd overreacted the night before. Maybe Jed was just a harmless drifter. After breakfast, I decided to explore a nearby trail. I left a note on the dashboard, a habit from watching too many true crime shows, grabbed my backpack, and set off. The trail was serene, with sunlight filtering through the canopy and leaves crunching underfoot. I was about an hour in when I noticed something odd, a campsite just off the path. But it looked abandoned. Curious, I ventured closer. Tents were collapsed, and belongings were strewn about as if the occupants had left in a hurry. Unease settled in my stomach. This is how people end up in horror movies, I joked nervously to myself. I decided to head back. As I turned, I nearly bumped into Jed. "Whoa, you startled me," I exclaimed. "Sorry about that," he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "What brings you here?" "Just hiking," I replied, trying to sound casual. "You?" "Same," he said, his gaze fixed on me. "Shame about what happened here." "Yeah, looks like they left in a hurry," he chuckled softly. "Or something made them leave." I swallowed hard. "Well, I should get going." "Don't let me keep you," he said, stepping aside. I walked briskly back to the trail, feeling his eyes on me the whole time. By the time I reached my RV, my heart was pounding. Maybe it's time to move on to another site, I thought. I started packing up when I heard a rustling behind me. I spun around, half expecting Jed, but it was another man, this one wearing a park ranger uniform. "Sorry to startle you," he said. "I'm Ranger Thompson, just making my rounds." "Oh, thank goodness," I sighed in relief. "Randy Farnsworth. Everything all right? You look a bit shaken." I debated whether to mention Jed, but decided I might sound paranoid. "Just had an odd encounter earlier. Do you know a man named Jedediah around here?" The ranger's expression darkened. "Jedediah Clark?" "Yeah, goes by Jed." He nodded grimly. "We've had reports about him. I'd advise you to be cautious. He's not well." "Not well how?" I pressed. "Look, it's probably best if you relocate to a more populated area of the park," he suggested. "Safety in numbers." "Understood," I said, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Thanks for the warning." As he left, I hurried to finish packing. Just as I was about to start the engine, I realized I'd left my map on the picnic table. I stepped out to grab it, when something heavy struck me from behind. Everything went black. I awoke to a splitting headache and found myself tied to a chair inside what looked like an old cabin. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting eerie shadows on the walls adorned with hunting trophies. "Rise and shine?" came Jed's voice from the darkness. "What do you want?" I demanded, struggling against the ropes. He stepped into the light, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Company. Is that too much to ask? Kidnapping isn't exactly the way to make friends," I retorted. He laughed. "Oh, but we're past pleasantries now. Look, if it's money you want—" "Money?" he interrupted. "You think this is about money? No, all this is about survival." "Survival?" He began pacing. "City folks like you come here thinking you own the place, leaving your trash, making noise, disrupting the balance. I'm sorry if I—" "Too late for apologies," he snapped. "You and your kind are a blight." "You're not making any sense," I said, trying to keep him talking while I worked at the knots. He pulled out a hunting knife, examining it thoughtfully. "Sense? Sense is living off the land, respecting its laws, not hiding in metal boxes on wheels." "Okay, noted. I'll just be on my way and promise to leave nature untouched," I said. He shook his head slowly. "Can't let you do that." Before I could respond, there was a loud bang on the door. "Jedediah Clark, this is Ranger Thompson. Open up!" Jed's eyes flickered with rage. "You just couldn't stay quiet, could you?" As he moved toward the door, adrenaline surged through me. I managed to loosen the ropes enough to free one hand. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy wooden stool and waited. As Jed turned back, I swung with all my might. The stool connected with his shoulder, causing him to drop the knife and stumble. "You little," he growled. I didn't wait for him to finish. I bolted for the back door, bursting into the cool night air. My RV was parked nearby, and I sprinted toward it, fumbling with the keys. As I jumped inside and started the engine, I saw Jed appear in the side mirror, fury etched on his face. I didn't look back. Later, I learned that Jed had been evading capture for months. He was a former survivalist who lost his grip on reality after a tragic accident claimed his family. As for me, next time someone suggests a nature trip, I'll politely decline. I'm outdoorsy, in that I like having drinks on patios. My name is Austin Gibson, and this happened back in 2011 in Shawnee National Forest, Illinois, when I first took a temporary ranger job there to help with the busy fall season. Never suspecting I'd leave that place with shaking hands and a heart full of questions. I remember stepping into that small ranger station around late September, feeling pretty good because I'd managed to snag a cheap motel room in town that morning. I had a bland cheese sandwich for breakfast, just something out of the convenience store freezer section, and washed it down with watery coffee. I wore a faded uniform passed down from a previous hire who'd left mustard stains near the left pocket. It smelled like stale sweat and cheap detergent, but I was just glad to have work. I was 25, broke, and eager to prove myself reliable. I liked the quiet of the forest trails, the dense maples and oaks, and the smell of damp leaves after last week's rain. We had a small team, just me and 2 others on rotation that day. Tom, older and with a bushy beard that he tied with a rubber band, always joked about his ex-wife and how her new husband sold fancy lawnmowers. And Gina, in her early 40s, usually wore a baseball cap over short-cropped hair. She had a habit of humming some old tune I couldn't place whenever she got nervous. She'd say, "Pat, you know that feeling when you think the woods are just a bit too still?" I didn't know what she meant back then. I thought forests were supposed to be quiet. That morning, Gina handed me a radio and said, "Don't wander off without checking in. It's not summer camp season, but we still get the odd hiker." By noon, I was on a trail known as Pine Hollow Path, which, despite the name, had more oaks than pines. The canopy let through thin beams of light, and the forest floor was scattered with red and brown leaves. I came across a half-eaten energy bar wrapper on the path, which struck me as odd because we usually lectured visitors about leaving no trash. I stuffed it in my pocket. About an hour later, I stumbled on something far more disturbing, a torn jacket sleeve snagged on a low branch. It looked recent, maybe a day old, and the fabric was stiff with something dark. I didn't want to think about it. That's when I radioed Tom. "Hey, Found a torn piece of clothing. Could be a lost hiker. Anything on the logs? Tom answered with a yawn. We had a party of 3 who checked in yesterday. They should have been out by now. That sent a chill into my chest, and I began scanning the underbrush with more care. I followed a faint trail of broken twigs and disturbed leaves off the main path. About 20 feet in, I smelled something unpleasant, like old meat left out on a warm countertop. I advanced slowly, heart tapping at my ribs. In a small clearing behind a fallen tree, I found the body of a man. He looked about 40, wearing a hiking vest and boots. His left arm lay twisted at a strange angle, and part of his torso had been torn open. The sight made my stomach lurch. I stepped back, pressed my hand against my mouth, and tried to breathe through it. Then I spoke into the radio with forced calm. "Tom," I said, "I've got a deceased male hiker here. Looks like an animal attack." Gina broke in, her voice uneasy. "Animal attacks are rare here. Are you sure?" I didn't answer her. I just gave them my coordinates. While I waited, I squatted down, thinking maybe the poor guy slipped and got mauled by a coyote or something. But coyotes don't usually leave bodies like that. I took in the surroundings, noticing deep scratches on a nearby tree trunk, higher than my shoulders. There was a pattern, something I couldn't quite place. But it definitely wasn't from a raccoon or a bobcat. When Tom and Gina arrived, they were both grim-faced. Tom tried to hide his shock. Gina stopped humming. She just stared and shook her head. We decided to search for the other 2 hikers from that party of 3. Tom radioed the station to call for authorities. We couldn't just leave, not with the possibility of survivors. We moved deeper into the woods, spreading out but staying close enough to yell if something happened. I remember wiping sweat off my forehead, even though it wasn't that hot. The silence weighed on me. Sometimes a branch cracked underfoot and I jumped. Then we found another body. This time, it was a woman, slumped against a boulder. Her pack was gone, her face frozen in a look of pain. She had similar wounds, and the ground around her was stained and scattered with damp leaves. I wish I hadn't eaten that cheese sandwich earlier. "Hello? Anybody out here?" I called. No answer. I heard Tom whisper, "This is bad, Pat." I nodded, my mouth dry. Gina, who walked a short distance away, suddenly shouted, "Found footprints!" We hurried over. There were large impressions in the soft earth, bigger than any mountain lion print I'd seen in guides. They looked like a cat's, but heavier. Deeper. "A cougar?" Tom asked. Gina shrugged. Not impossible, but she trailed off. Something about these tracks bothered her. They showed long strides, more powerful than what we expected. We decided to keep searching for the 3rd hiker. The afternoon light was fading, and we had to use flashlights. Being out there as dusk approached set me on edge. I found myself talking just to break the tension. "Tom, remember that big raccoon we saw by the dumpsters yesterday?" Tom grunted. I tried a lame joke. "If that raccoon shows up now, I'll offer him my last candy bar to watch our backs." No one laughed. Then, at twilight, we heard a scream, quick and sharp. We ran toward it, stumbling over roots and rocks. We found the 3rd hiker, alive at first. A young guy in his 20s, holding his side, crouched under a half-fallen tree. "Help!" he shouted, voice cracking. We rushed over, flashlights jumping. He looked terrified, eyes darting behind us as if expecting something to pounce. It took them. "It's out here." He didn't have to say more. We heard heavy steps in the brush, a soft rustling that made my skin prickle. We formed a semicircle around the wounded hiker, shining our beams into the dark trees. I saw a shape then, low and muscular, moving between trunks. No distinct silhouette, just movement. My heart thundered. Then it rushed forward. I could barely describe its form. A cat-like body, maybe 5 feet long, thick shoulders, dark fur that blended with the night. It moved quietly, at first. Then, thump! It slammed into the injured hiker. He screamed. We shouted, shining lights into its face. I saw powerful jaws flash open and close. The man's screams turned into choking gasps. I stepped forward, but Tom grabbed my shoulder. "Pat, no. It's too late." Gina swung her flashlight at the creature's head, and it hissed, a strange, sharp sound. Then it ran off into the darkness, leaving the man on the ground. He was gone. And that was only the beginning. We knelt beside him. He was gone. It had ended his life in seconds. Gina cursed under her breath. Tom looked like he might cry. I felt sick again, kneeling there, trying to hold my flashlight steady. Now we had 3 dead hikers, a killer animal somewhere in the woods, and night pressing in on all sides. We made a plan to retreat to the station. The radio crackled as we tried to call for backup. Spotty reception. "We need the phone," I said. Tom nodded. We hurried back along the trail, our flashlights bouncing over tree trunks and roots. Gina whispered, "Don't run. Running sets it off." We moved briskly but tried to look calm, which was impossible. I gripped my radio so hard my knuckles hurt. Halfway back, we realized something was keeping pace with us. Branches snapped lightly. I tried to catch a glimpse but only saw shifting silhouettes. We picked up speed. "I'll buy us all dinner if we get out of this," I muttered. No one responded. I suppose we all wanted to pretend we were anywhere else, maybe at a diner with French fries and milkshakes, not stuck in the dark with a vicious predator. At one point, Tom lagged behind to catch his breath. "Go ahead," he said. "I'll be right there." Gina and I stopped, turned back. "Don't be stupid," she said. "We stick together." He nodded and lumbered forward, chest heaving. He was bigger than me, maybe 50 pounds heavier, and the fear weighed on him. We formed a tight group, shining lights in every direction. The woods smelled damp and earthy, and every sound set me on edge. We reached a fork in the path. By then, I noticed fresh scratches on the bark of a large oak, long, parallel marks, too clean to be random. We heard a sudden snapping of twigs and spun around. The creature rushed past our lights so fast I barely saw more than a dark shape. Tom shouted, "There!" but it moved in a blur. Gina and I tried to stand back to back with him. We breathed in quick, shallow gasps. I held a length of sturdy branch I'd picked up, though I doubted it would help much. A moment passed, maybe less. Then it struck again, hitting Tom this time. I swung the branch wildly, hitting only air. I saw Tom on the ground, coughing, struggling. Gina screamed at me to help him. I knelt and tried to pull him up. His chest and shoulder were torn, and his hands shook as he reached for me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I tried to stop the bleeding with my jacket, but it was too much. His eyes fluttered. I pleaded, "Come on, Tom. Don't leave me here, man." He said nothing else. Gina stood guard, flashlight shaking in her grip. The forest was too silent again. After a minute, I realized Tom was gone. My eyes stung with tears. I swallowed hard and said, "Gina, we have to run." We ran. I know I said not to run earlier, but we had no choice. Our boots pounded the dirt. The station wasn't far. The creature crashed through the brush behind us, keeping pace. My lungs burned, and my mind spun. I tried to recall if there was a service rifle locked at the station. Maybe. Maybe not. Anything would help. Gina was ahead of me, her flashlight beam shaking. We broke through the last stand of trees and saw the faint light from the station's bulb. I fumbled for the door, keys rattling. Inside, I slammed it shut and pushed a heavy cabinet against it. Gina collapsed into a chair, gasping. "We lost Tom," she said flatly. I nodded, pressing my forehead against the door. We tried the landline phone, static. We tried the radio, no immediate response. Maybe the call had gone out earlier and help was on the way. Maybe not. While Gina searched for a first aid kit, I peered out a small window. Nothing but darkness and the suggestion of trees. I listened hard, hearing only the hum of the station's small fridge. There was a box of flares on a shelf, and I pulled one out, thinking maybe we could signal someone. I waited, half expecting the animal to burst in. But it didn't. Hours passed. Gina stayed quiet. I remember rummaging through a drawer and finding a half-eaten bag of pretzels. My throat was too tight to swallow. As the first hint of dawn broke, we dared to open the door a crack. The forest looked normal. Dew on leaves. Pale light filtering through. No sign of the creature. No strange prints by the door. Nothing. We stepped outside, tense, every sense sharpened. We didn't talk about going back to look for the bodies. We just knew we had to get the proper authorities and show them. We found a ranger truck behind the station, old, but it ran. Gina drove while I clutched the flare gun. My hands trembled with every bump in the dirt road. We made it out. But we carried what we saw inside our minds. When the sheriff's deputies and wildlife officers arrived later that day, they searched in teams. rifles ready. They found the bodies. They found unusual tracks. But I never heard a confident explanation. Maybe a rogue predator wandered in from another region. Maybe something escaped from a private collector's estate. I don't know. Gina and I never got a satisfying answer. They patrolled heavily for weeks. Nothing else turned up. Eventually, people said it must have been a one-time tragedy. I still think about it. I still see that creature's eyes in the beam of my flashlight. Sometimes, I wonder if it slipped away to another stretch of forest, still hungry, still waiting to surprise someone. I can't shake that thought. Even today, when I step outside at dusk, I pause and listen harder than I did before, just in case. My name is Logan Cooper, and this happened to me on September 14th, 1994. I've been a search and rescue officer for almost 2 decades now. I've seen a lot, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the fall of '88. It was one of those years when the forest seemed to breathe easier, the air crisp and cool, the leaves transforming into a kaleidoscope of red, orange, and yellow. Most of my days were spent patrolling the trails and helping lost hikers find their way back. It was a job I loved, one that gave me a sense of purpose and connection to nature. It started as a regular Friday. I was in the ranger station, sipping on a cup of coffee, the kind that's more bitter than soothing, when the call came in. A family reported their teenage son missing. They were camping in the dense woods of the Cascade Range, near a spot we locals called Blackwood Hollow. It wasn't a popular area. In fact, it was pretty remote, which made it all the more concerning. The boy, Kyle Thompson, had been missing for nearly 12 hours. I grabbed my gear, radioed my partner Rick, and we headed out. Rick was a good guy, a bit younger than me, with a sharp mind and quick wit. We joked about how every rescue mission felt like we were stepping into an old western, with us as the cowboys riding into the unknown. We reached Blackwood Hollow by late afternoon. The place had an eerie calm to it, a stillness that seemed to swallow sound. We met Kyle's parents at their campsite. They were frantic, the mother on the verge of tears, the father pacing like a caged animal. They explained that Kyle had wandered off the previous night, saying he was going to explore, but he never came back. Rick and I started our search, moving in a grid pattern, calling out Kyle's name. We had a good system, years of experience between us. As dusk settled, the forest grew darker, and our flashlights barely cut through the thickening gloom. There's something about the woods at night that gets under your skin, makes you feel like you're being watched. About an hour in, we found Kyle's backpack. It was lying at the base of a massive oak tree, partially covered in leaves. Inside were typical teenage things: a flashlight, some snacks, a notebook, but no sign of Kyle. We pressed on, our shouts becoming more urgent. Then we heard it, a faint, distant cry. It was hard to pinpoint, but it was there. We followed the sound, moving quickly now, the urgency driving us forward. The cries led us deeper into the forest, to a part I wasn't familiar with. The trees were denser, the path narrower. It felt like we were being funneled into a trap. We came upon a clearing, and there, in the middle, was a small, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, windows shattered, roof caved in. The cries were louder now, coming from inside. Rick and I exchanged a look. This wasn't right, but we had to find Kyle. We approached the cabin cautiously, flashlight sweeping the area. I called out, "Kyle, you in there?" No response, just the continued whimpering. We pushed the door open and the smell hit us first, damp, rotting wood mixed with something metallic. Blood. Inside, the place was a mess. Furniture overturned, debris everywhere. In the corner, we saw him, Kyle, huddled and trembling, eyes wide with fear. But he wasn't alone. Standing over him was a figure, tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Before we could react, the figure lunged at Rick, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. Rick went down, and I barely had time to draw my knife. I slashed at the figure, connecting with something solid. It hissed, a sound that made my skin crawl, and retreated into the shadows. I grabbed Kyle, pulling him to his feet. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted out of the cabin. Rick was on the ground, clutching his side but alive. We made it to the clearing before I dared to look back. The figure was standing in the doorway, watching us, but it didn't follow. We helped Rick up, and with Kyle between us, we made our way back to the campsite as fast as we could. The whole time, I felt like we were being hunted, the trees closing in around us. But we didn't stop, didn't look back, until we were safely at the ranger station. Kyle's parents were relieved, their gratitude evident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Rick was taken to the hospital, his wound deep but not life-threatening. I stayed behind, trying to piece together what had happened. The authorities were called, and a search was conducted. But the cabin was never found. Kyle's memory was hazy, filled with fragments of a nightmare he couldn't fully recall. He mentioned being lured by a voice, something that seemed human but wasn't. Weeks passed, and the incident was quietly swept under the rug. Officially, it was chalked up to a bear attack, though anyone who'd seen the wounds knew better. Rick recovered, but he left the job soon after. Said he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching. I stayed on, but Blackwood Hollow became a place I avoided. The forest felt different, like it had secrets best left undisturbed. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through the trees, I sometimes hear that faint cry, a reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows of our world. Years later, the memory still haunts me. Not just the encounter, but the sense of helplessness. The realization that there are things out there beyond our understanding. Kyle grew up, moved away, tried to forget. But I couldn't. It became a part of me, a shadow that followed wherever I went. One night, I was having a beer with an old friend, Jason. He was another ranger, one who had his own stories of the strange and unexplainable. We were sitting on my porch watching the stars when I finally told him about that night in Blackwood Hollow. He listened, a thoughtful look on his face, then nodded. "I've heard similar stories," he said. "Different places, different faces, but the same kind of presence. Some say it's a spirit. Others think it's something more primal, more ancient." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of his words hanging in the air. It didn't bring me comfort, but it felt good to share the burden, to know I wasn't alone in my experience. Life went on, as it does. I kept doing my job, helping those lost in the wilderness, always with a cautious eye on the tree line. I never went back to Blackwood Hollow, and neither did Rick. It became one of those places with a story attached, a whispered legend among the rangers. In the end, I think that's what it was, a legend, something that exists on the edges of our reality, only revealing itself when we stray too far into the unknown. And maybe that's for the best. Some things are meant to remain hidden, their mysteries left unsolved. I still wonder about that night, about what I saw and what might have happened if we hadn't escaped. It's a question that lingers, unanswered, a reminder of the thin line between our world and whatever lies beyond. And as long as I'm alive, I'll carry that memory with me, a testament to the things we'll never fully understand. It all started with an offhand joke. You hear enough bad jokes in my line of work, but this one stood out. It was 2004, somewhere deep in the North Carolina woods, the kind of place tourists don't even know exists. I had been on 100 missions before, but this one seemed simple. Find the locals who had gone missing and bring them back, dead or alive. I joined the Green Berets for the adrenaline, for the chance to do something meaningful. But over the years, that rush started to fade, until that damn joke. Some of the local cops, the ones I was meant to coordinate with, had this thing where they'd whisper around me like they were afraid to say something out loud. One of them, a big guy named Remy, who always chewed tobacco and spat on his own boots, leaned in one night while I was cleaning my rifle and said, "The woods don't like strangers much. They got their own rules. And yeah, sometimes they eat folks who break them." I remember rolling my eyes and grunting something about old wives' tales, but it stuck with me. I mean, I'd been through enough to know that when locals get weird, there's usually a reason. So I took it as a heads up, though I didn't believe in superstitions. Not then, anyway. By the time we got out there, me, Remy, and a few other locals we picked up, the sun was slipping low behind the trees, giving us just enough time to set up a base camp. I didn't like the idea of working with the local guys, especially Remy, who cracked more jokes than a man should, but orders are orders. One of them, Pete, had lived out here all his life. He swore he'd seen bears doing strange things, but I didn't pay it much mind. Bears don't take people whole, and they sure as hell don't drag them away without leaving a mess. Remy, Pete, and I split up to cover more ground. Remy took the creek bed. Pete took the ridge above it. That left me with the thickest part of the woods, where the trees leaned in close like a suffocating crowd. I could feel the humidity seeping through my clothes. The air smelled like pine and something rotten underneath. It wasn't long before I found my first clue. A bloody shirt, half buried under a pile of leaves. Like something had tried to hide it, but didn't care to do it right. The thing about finding blood is, it's never a good sign. But this wasn't the splatter of a struggle or the spray you get when something big goes down. No, this was something else. Methodical. I pressed on, radioing Remy and Pete every 15 minutes like we'd planned. No answers, but I could hear faint static, just enough to know the radios weren't dead. It's just that they weren't responding. By dusk, I found more. Pieces of a tent, torn like they'd been shredded by claws, though not the kind you'd expect. No signs of struggle, no trap, just a creeping sense that something was off. Then I found the bones, not scattered, not chewed, laid out in a pattern. Deliberate, like someone had taken their time setting them out, like a child making a stick figure in the dirt. There was no mistaking it. Human. I cracked another joke over the radio, something dumb about arts and crafts, but got nothing back. The silence sat heavy, but I pushed on. Maybe they were messing with me, trying to scare the new guy from out of town. That's when I heard it. A snapping sound. Low to the ground, like someone or something. Breaking branches. I kept my rifle at the ready and pushed through a thicket. That's when I spotted Remy's body, or at least what was left of it. Slumped against a tree, his guts spilled out like someone had unzipped him. There was no sign of Pete. I didn't get close enough to see much more, because of what stood over Remy's corpse. It looked like a wolf. If wolves walked on two legs, its fur was matted, dripping with blood that wasn't its own. Its teeth, longer, thinner than they should be, gleamed in the dim light. It didn't look right. Didn't move right. My first thought was that maybe it was a man. Some freaky local in a getup, trying to scare me. But then it crouched low, sniffing at the air, and I knew better. This thing wasn't interested in me, at least not yet. I dropped down, hoping the thick brush would hide me. My breath came out in short bursts. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might hear me. I didn't have a clean shot. And this wasn't the kind of thing you wanted to miss. I watched it turn its head, almost like it was listening for something. Then it stood up and started walking toward the trees. Its limbs moved in jerky, unnatural ways, and I got the impression that whatever it was, it didn't belong in a world that made sense. I waited until it was far enough, then crawled back to where Remy lay, took what was left of his radio, and tried to call for backup. Static. Just static. Pete still wasn't responding either. I thought about turning back to camp, but I couldn't leave without knowing what happened to Pete. Maybe he found a way out. Maybe he was just lost in the dark. Or maybe he wasn't. I found Pete an hour later, hanging from a tree, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. Below him, more bones. Some fresh, some old. There was a skull, cracked open like a walnut, and for the first time in my life, I was scared in a way I hadn't been, even when bullets were flying. This wasn't just about some missing folks anymore. This was a burial ground, a damn feeding ground. I've seen death before, but not like this, not methodical, not like a ritual. I radioed again, whispering this time, as if keeping my voice low might make me less real to whatever was out there. My rifle felt heavy, useless, but I kept it clutched in my hands like a lifeline. I needed to find a way back, but then I heard that same snapping sound, closer this time. It didn't come from the ground. It came from above. That's when I saw them. More of those things, climbing through the treetops like giant bats, their limbs twisting around branches like they had extra joints. There were at least 3 of them, but they moved so fast I couldn't keep count. I stayed perfectly still, hoping they'd miss me, but one of them leapt down, landing in front of me with a soft thud, like a cat dropping from a fence. I didn't think. I fired 3 rounds into its chest. It staggered back, but the thing didn't go down. It shrieked. Not like an animal, not like anything I had ever heard. A kind of sound that drilled into your skull and rattled around in your head. But it bled, and that gave me a sliver of hope. I fired again, aiming for its head, and this time it dropped, twitching on the ground like a dying fish. The others noticed. They dropped from the trees, their claws scraping bark as they hit the ground. I ran. I've never run so fast in my life, and I didn't look back, not even when I heard them crashing through the underbrush behind me. My legs burned, my lungs felt like they were tearing apart, but I ran until I stumbled into a clearing and saw the lights of a cabin up ahead. I crashed through the door, slamming it shut behind me. An old man sat in a rickety chair by the fireplace, staring at me like I had just interrupted his dinner. He didn't seem surprised to see a soldier covered in blood, carrying a smoking rifle. He just looked at me, his expression flat, like he was watching a rerun of a TV show he'd seen 1,000 times before. I asked him if he had a phone, a radio, anything. He just shook his head and said, "They come for what they want, and then they leave. Always have." He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared past me, like he was looking through the walls. He started talking about the woods like they were alive, about how sometimes the forest decides who stays and who goes. I didn't have time for his riddles. I barricaded the windows, checked my ammunition, and asked him if he knew a way out. He just laughed, this low, gravelly sound that echoed in the small room. "You don't get out, son. You just survive." And then he went quiet, staring into the flames as if that was all that mattered. I watched through the window as the things circled the cabin, their silhouettes barely visible in the shadows beyond the firelight. One of them came closer, dragging something behind it. Pete's body. It left him just outside, like bait. That's when I made my decision. I grabbed a lantern and the last of my ammunition and told the old man to stay inside. He just nodded like he'd heard it all before. I stepped outside, the cold hitting me like a slap. They were waiting, their heads cocked to one side, like they were curious, like they wanted to see what I'd do. I lit the lantern, smashed it against the cabin wall, and watched as the flames leapt up, catching on the dry wood. I figured if I couldn't get out, I'd take them down with me. The fire spread fast, crackling through the walls, but the creatures didn't flinch. They just watched as the flames consumed the cabin. That's when I realized the old man wasn't just resigned. He was one of them, or something like them, part of whatever lived out there in the woods. I shot at one of the creatures, catching it in the leg. It stumbled, but didn't go down. The others lunged. I fought like hell, but they were faster. One of them grabbed my arm, twisting it until I heard the snap. I dropped to the ground, fighting the pain as I clawed for my rifle, but they knocked it out of reach. Then they stopped. One of them let out a high-pitched yelp, and the others retreated into the shadows as if called back. I lay there, panting, my vision swimming. And then I saw it, their leader, standing on 2 legs, staring at me with something like curiosity. It leaned down close, sniffing the air, and then it turned and loped off into the trees, dragging Pete's body with it. I don't know why they left me alive. Maybe it was some twisted game. Maybe it was their way of letting me deliver the message. But as I lay there, staring up at the burning cabin, I realized what the old man meant. You don't get out. You just survive. And they let you remember. By dawn, a search party found me. They didn't find the old man, and they sure as hell didn't find Pete. They asked me what happened, but I didn't give them any answers they'd believe. They patched me up, got me out of the woods, and that was that. I left without saying a word. I got out, sure. But sometimes I think about Remy, about Pete, about what those things really are. Part animal, part nightmare. Maybe they were here long before us, just waiting for the woods to change back to the way they liked it. And then I heard the final joke from one of the locals, the one that almost made me laugh. Maybe the woods just didn't like your joke, stranger. My name is Timothy Perez. I was 27 years old when it happened. I don't tell this story because I want to. I tell it because I need to. People need to know what's out there, what's hiding in the places the maps call wild and empty. I used to think nothing scared me. I don't think that anymore. It was supposed to be a week-long RV trip through Florida's backwoods. Just me, my girlfriend Lisa, my best friend Tommy, and his buddy Trevor. We had planned it for months, an escape from the city, from our jobs, from reality. Tate's Hell State Forest sounded perfect. Isolated, beautiful, untouched. A little too untouched, as we would soon learn. The trouble started before we even reached our campsite. We were deep in the forest when the RV jolted violently, throwing Lisa against the window. The sound of crunching metal and hissing air followed. I slammed on the brakes. "What the hell was that?" Tommy asked, his hands gripping the dashboard. I jumped out to check. The front tire was shredded, destroyed by a row of rusted nails hidden beneath a layer of leaves and mud. Someone had put them there. "This isn't normal," Lisa muttered, standing beside me. Her auburn hair clung to her face in the humid air, her green eyes scanning the trees like they were watching her back. Who the hell booby-traps a road? Poachers, Tommy guessed. Or just some wanting to mess with tourists. Trevor, the quietest of us, crouched near the tire. We're stuck. He wasn't wrong. We had no cell service, no spare, and no way to call for help. The nearest ranger station was a long, miserable hike away. I suggested we camp for the night and figure it out in the morning. Everyone agreed, though Lisa looked uneasy. That night, things got worse. It started with the noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees. But it wasn't. I heard whispers, low, breathy voices, laughter, the kind of laughter that didn't belong. "Did you hear that?" Lisa whispered, gripping my arm. "Yeah," I admitted. Tommy unzipped the tent. "The hell is out there?" Trevor was already up, staring into the darkness. "Footsteps," he murmured. "Barefoot. We found the prints in the morning. Large, human, but wrong, too long, too narrow, like someone had been walking on the edges of their feet. They circled our campsite, never coming closer than a few yards. Then we found the doll. It was sitting on a log near the fire pit, a small, crude thing made of sticks and twine, its mouth sewn shut with what looked like human hair. Lisa refused to touch it. No, this is some Blair Witch." Trevor picked it up, inspecting the dark stains on its arms. Dried blood. We should have left then. But we didn't. We were arrogant. We thought we could handle it. That afternoon, Trevor went missing. He said he was going to take a leak and never came back. At first, we laughed it off, thinking he was messing with us. But when an hour passed, we started searching. We found his flashlight lying in the dirt. The lens cracked. His footprints stopped suddenly, like he had been lifted off the ground. Lisa wanted to leave. Tommy agreed. I told them we had to find Trevor first, and then he came back. It was just before sunset when he walked into camp. His clothes were dirty, his face blank. "Jesus, Trevor, where the hell have you been?" I demanded. "Got lost," he said. His voice was flat. "Wrong." Lisa grabbed my arm and whispered, "That's not Trevor." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. That night I woke up to whispering. I rolled over and saw Trevor sitting outside the tent, his back to me, mumbling to something I couldn't see. "Trevor?" He turned his head slightly, but not all the way. "Go back to sleep." I didn't. In the morning, Lisa pulled me aside. "Something's wrong with him, Timothy." "Yeah," I admitted. "But what do? We leave. Now." Before we could, Tommy went missing. We searched all day, shouting his name, finding nothing but broken branches and deep, sunken footprints leading into the swamp. "He's gone," Lisa whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Then we heard the scream. It was distant but unmistakable. Tommy. He was alive. He was in trouble. Trevor turned to us, grinning for the first time in days. "We should go after him." Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. Still, I grabbed a knife and a flashlight, and Lisa followed. We ran toward the sound, deeper into the forest. The air grew thick with the stench of rot. Then we saw the pit. It was a deep hole lined with sharpened sticks. Bones littered the bottom. Human bones. And Tommy was there, bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror. Jesus! I jumped down, cutting the ropes around his wrists. Who did this to you? Before he could answer, something hit me. Hard. When I came to, Lisa was screaming. I was tied to a wooden post, my arms wrenched behind my back. Firelight flickered, revealing figures moving through the trees. Thin, half-naked men and women with hollow eyes and sharpened teeth. They grinned at me, their mouths smeared with blood. Cannibals. And standing among them, smiling like he belonged, was Trevor. Trevor, I croaked. He crouched beside me. You shouldn't have come looking for Tommy. I struggled, but the ropes were too tight. Lisa was tied next to me, her breath coming in ragged gasps. You were always the hero, Trevor whispered. Always the one everyone looked up to. But out here, you're nothing. I spat at him. You're insane. He wiped his face and smirked. You'll see. Soon enough. The cult leader approached, his face covered in scars. He muttered something in a language I didn't recognize, then pointed at Lisa. 2 men grabbed her. She screamed. I thrashed against my restraints. No, take me instead. Trevor leaned in. That's not how this works. I did the only thing I could. I bit down on the rope, sawing at it with my teeth. The fibers tore against my tongue. Then I heard Lisa cry out in pain. I snapped. With a final yank, the rope gave. I ripped my arms free and grabbed a burning log from the fire. I swung it into the nearest cannibal's face, the heat peeling skin from bone. Lisa kicked the man holding her. I grabbed a knife from the ground and cut her loose. Then we ran. The cult screamed behind us, their footsteps slamming against the dirt. I didn't look back. Somewhere in the chaos, Trevor shouted, Timothy, wait! I turned and saw him standing at the tree line, his face twisted in something like regret. Please, he begged. I didn't want this. Lisa raised the knife. I hesitated. Then I saw his smile flicker back. I stabbed him in the throat. We found the road just as a truck came around the bend. The driver nearly crashed trying to avoid us. We never spoke to the police. There was nothing to find. No evidence, no bodies, only nightmares. And sometimes, late at night, I think about Trevor. And I wonder if I really killed him.